contact other dogs to work. And so I know that they have like powers and stuff, but it just can help us. Yeah. Yeah, thankfully it happened in City of Casper.
Well, I think we better get started, everyone. I'm sure the Vice Mayor will be here shortly. Just a word of explanation and just a brief discussion about the agenda. This really was my oversight. The Board of Directors for Wham is meeting a week from this Thursday, and it just got by me that we will start the process of developing resolutions that Wham would support and promote in the upcoming legislative session. So I realize that some of you have had limited involvement in Wham, and there's a range of opinions about the value of Wham, but they do function essentially as our voice in the legislative body and advocate for things that are in the best interest of all of the municipalities. And as a member, we have some say in what those resolutions look like and what we want to see Wham prioritize in the upcoming session. So I took the liberty of adding that to our agenda because of that timeline. If there wasn't the meeting a week from this Thursday, it could certainly wait. So we already had a pretty lengthy agenda. There may be an item or two that could be deferred here if we need to. Let's just see how quickly we can get through things, and we'll just see how it all plays out. So in retrospect, we probably should have done the agenda a little different. So with that mea culpa, let's get started. Well, is there anything that happened last Tuesday that we left undone, or that we heard public comment on that we really should follow up on? Ken?
The only thing that I remember, just our pre-session, Cassie took longer, which was fine. There was a cell phone discussion, but I think that can wait. But I just wanted to point that out, that we never got to that or the agenda reviews really, but like I said, the one can definitely wait with our schedule today.
That's on our pre-meeting schedule for next week, is it not?
Mr. Mayor, Council, we are suggesting that it be on the pre-meeting schedule for next week, but if Council would like to move that and defer it further, we're very comfortable with that, whatever you'd like to do.
I mean, the memo and the documentation on it that Tracy had, I believe, is pretty clear. Your phone's not safe no matter what. And anybody that's going to do a subpoena is going to hold both devices. So I said the city saves money on cell phones.
What about record retention though, because that was the other discussion that we had.
Well, I think I would like to make a distinction between scheduling something and starting the discussion on it.
I'd say leave it as what.
Let's talk about it next week, and if we can resolve it quickly, fine. If not, we'll know we need to set some more time for it. Anything else from last week? Citizen comment, anything else? Okay. All right. So we need to resolve the request they received from Cassie. I think you all understand the circumstances, that they went through an interview process and then agreed to pay the new director for a period of time while they were learning the job. And just want to open it up for discussion. As to, I think Carter's proposal is that we pay 25% of those costs, partly because that was the cost of the search process, if I remember correctly.
Pretty close.
As opposed to paying for the actual salary during the period when both would be employed. So comments on that, Steve?
I think the only comment I would make is that I think we had a discussion about it today. The difference between 25% and the actual cost is pretty minor, so maybe we would just pick up the cost of the recruitment portion of that.
I agree.
Mr. Mayor, to respond to that real quickly, I think it's about 18,000, if I remember correctly. And so 16,750 is what I proposed last time. 18,000 is probably what Councilman Friel is referring to.
Other comments?
I'm fine with paying the recommended amount that you're talking about. And when we have Cassie come up time and time again, and you know, we've asked them to streamline bus routes and create efficiencies, and they've done all those things. my sense is that most of us are in agreement that Cassie is a part of our community and a needed part of our community. So let's pay that 25%, and then, you know, we heard from them a couple weeks ago or last week that there's gonna be an additional request that's needed to keep the buses rolling. So, I mean, as we go through this budgeting process, we look at things and at least give them an assurance that we're gonna keep that open and operating. We have the conversation and we continue to make them run. I think they've done the efficiency process. I don't wanna see it go away. I think it's a necessary piece for the city, so I'd like to say let's commit that 25% and then commit to keeping it operational and not, you know, a pristine limousine service, but the service that we've got that's been created.
And we can consider their reserve needs as we put our budget together for the upcoming year. Because really, that's what's this is about, is replenishing reserves. Steve?
So we had the opportunity to sit down with them today at Cassie, and during our discussion, I think that it would be beneficial if we could maybe put Cassie also on one of our work session agendas and give them a certain amount of time so that we all clearly understand exactly how it's set up, how it's operated, where funding comes from, so that when we do go in, and I'd like to see it sooner than later, because when we do go into the budget session, I think it would be very important for everybody to understand that prior to going in there. It is very much needed, but I think we also need to fully understand how that whole operation actually takes place.
So you're all aware that we have a series of budget meetings scheduled in the middle of May. Was that included in the agenda that you're putting together, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, we certainly could devote some time during that process in particular, or we could try to squeeze something in pursuant to council's direction before that time as well. Whatever you'd like to see.
So 25% or 18,000 now, and possibly, well, we'd entertain whatever their request is when the time comes. Ken?
I'm not against that at all, but I do want to say I've been to stopped at Wendy's, at Smith's, some other places, and just kind of hearing some different folks talking about council and the legislative and stuff, and I just popped in and talked to them and kind of brought up this about Cassie and stuff, and it was probably 17 to 20 people. Actually, when they looked at it, citizens disagreed with it, disagreed with paying anything regarding it. I just happened to be there, just asked them, what do you think? Kind of ran over it a little bit with them. Now, granted, I didn't give them complete as detailed as I'm sure Cassie could have, but just bringing it up, like I said, there was several of them that said no, they wouldn't support that whatsoever. So, not saying I don't, I'm just saying what citizens I have talked to out of the blue that was talking about council stuff and different things they brought up or talking about it. So I am in favor of the 25%. I'm just wanting to throw that out there of just asking.
Just a tiny bit of clarification. This money would go to the foundation to reimburse basically interest monies over the years that they used to expend these. When we're talking about budget stuff later on about a deficit, that's actual Cassie. They're two separate entities.
Although they could certainly request that we put some additional money back in the foundation. Not saying we should or we shouldn't, but they could make that request. Because this will leave that foundation fund. It'll be much smaller than it was. So, okay, thumbs up on $18,000 at this time, and we'll certainly consider reasonable requests during the budgetary session.
Very good, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, we appreciate it.
The only thing I would add to you folks is I understand the need for the overlap period. Based on my experiences with succession, it's much longer than I would expect. And I would encourage you all to see by trial and error whether that amount of time is truly necessary.
Well, what will transpire is Marge is paid in the regular Cassie budget that you approved. The extra money for the 4 months will come out of the foundation.
Understood.
If Marge leaves before, on the city end, there will be less expenditure for salary. On the foundation end, the salary will still stay the same because we have committed to pay that difference between John and Marge.
But in your budgetary request, Carol, you certainly could say, we've made some salary reductions that are, and the budget is in a positive place because we didn't spend all of that money. Would you consider putting that money into the foundation instead?
Yeah, well, you know, and we don't know where
We-
we are
yeah.
right now. I mean, John just started March the 11th.
Right.
So we're still feeling when Marge will actually leave us. She needs some knee surgery. I will take the opportunity to tell you that we are going to have a celebration of Marge's 40 years of transit
Good.
on May the 30th, and all of you will be invited to help us send her on her merry way. And we hope to celebrate accordingly.
Well deserved, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on this? Let's move on. Food
Thank you.
trucks. So we have a request for allowing the signage to be placed, basically to mark off the spots in advance of when they are needed. Is that what the situation is?
Well,
Carter?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we actually, this request comes in the form of two heads, if you will. One is the user request that you are referencing, and second would be from the code standpoint that the fire department would ask for. And so if we could address the user side real quickly and then defer to Chief Harshman here to talk about the code standpoint, I'd appreciate that. The basic idea, as I understand it, and Mr. Houck, feel free to help me out with this if I get it wrong, if that's okay with you, is that the users would like an opportunity to notify the public further in advance than what our ordinance currently allows. As I understand it, that does not mean that the parking spaces would go away sooner. The parking spaces would still be available for the public to park in. They would be notified sooner, however, and they're asking that the ordinance be adjusted to reflect that longer notification period. Mr. Houck, does that sound right from the user standpoint?
Yeah, and the primary reason is since there's no parking enforcement on Saturdays downtown, we put our signs up at 11, which is when the ordinance allows us to for the 1 p.m. closure. But a lot of business owners and employees have already parked in those spaces for the day because they're used to doing that on Saturdays, and so we have to then track them down throughout the day to at 1 o'clock their cars are still there. We have to find whoever it is and ask them to move their vehicles. So it's happened probably 6 times that we've had to do 5 or 6 times. Every Saturday we've had a permit. So that was the request. That's why.
Chris?
As far as notification on the parking spots, it seems perfectly reasonable. I mean, I don't remember if we had a real firm basis on why we posted it at a certain time or why we even put that in law. I think we just did.
I think probably because we thought, well, these are 2-hour spaces, and
Probably so.
and that doesn't really apply on Saturday.
It doesn't hurt anything to post earlier.
No. Is everybody okay with letting them put a sign in those spots at 8 a.m. or whenever they choose to on Saturday?
Yeah, and maybe John would have some insight on this to Does that thing have to be done by law? Is it more appropriate to be done by law and when we post the notice, or?
It's in the ordinance now, so we would technically need to amend the ordinance.
Amend it, but do we need to amend it with another time, or do we need to address it? Can we make it a policy on a permit?
We could, yeah, just say that it would be, you know, up to the city council or city manager as designee, if you prefer to do it that way. But we probably need to have some reference in there as to why we're removing what's taking its place.
I just foresee us, you know, where we make a law, we posted that sign 2 minutes early, Mr. Howe. You signed this ticket.
How do people feel about just letting Carter and his staff decide these things?
If that's okay with John to do that, if, you know, if it doesn't run afoul of the language in the ordinance, yeah.
You okay with that, Sean?
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Okay. Good enough.
Can I defer to the fire department, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, Council, so the fire department's concern with food trucks is that when the council adopted the 2018 International Fire Code, the 2018 code for the first time in the code process addressed food trucks. Prior to that, there was no place in the code that addressed that. In looking into that in more depth and talking to the International Code Council, their definition of a vehicle is a motorized vehicle. Say a van that you drive to a point and deliver your food. And we even looked to DOT definitions of vehicles, which were the same. So we had this entire segment that we have operating in Casper, trailers that essentially do the exact same types of processes as a vehicle does, that were not covered under the code. And so our recommendation is that we add like 2/3 down the page on your second page of the memo where it says mobile food preparation vehicles. We propose adding food stands, push carts, or trailers that are equipped with appliances that produce grease-laden vapors. And so it covers the full gamut, because everybody's using liquid petroleum gas, propane to cook with. If they're producing grease-laden vapors, they're required to have a hood system with a fire extinguishing system in it, all aimed at protecting the workers themselves and the public that is in the area of the food stands. And we think that this seemed to be the cleanest way to incorporate everybody that's doing the same process.
Chris?
So is this written that if I were to get a hot dog stand with some kind of electric heater in there to keep the dogs warm, that I have to have, that's not going to be part of it, right?
That would not be, because you're really the bulk of the code addresses the gas that's used in the cooking process and a fire extinguishing system for grease-laden vapors.
Bob?
Yeah, just to make sure we're clear, if they're cooking using a griddle or a grill, they're not gonna have to have a hood and a fire extinguisher and a hood?
It would depend on what they're cooking. If they're let's say they're cooking sausage, then they're producing grease-laden vapors. And that would then require a hood system with a...
Even though it's maybe open on all sides or something, or?
Probably so. If you look at the strict interpretation of the code where it says anything that's producing grease-laden vapors, that would fall under that.
And that's where we're operating right now, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
And then what kind of incentive can we make to get bacon cooked a little bit better?
You don't like bendy bacon?
I like bacon, so if we can.
Okay.
Okay, that seems like a fairly minor change. We're just gonna include trailers. And just to clarify, this will therefore not include lemonade stands, right?
Yeah, you are correct, Mayor.
Yeah, we need to make sure
Unless they cook
tax
bacon and put
lemonade,
bacon in the
Girl
lemonade.
Scouts.
Any concerns about this?
Just to clarify, does the food trucks already have that in place then? Or is some food trucks gonna have to put that in place, I guess is my question, is how many food trucks are gonna be affected by this? Not that I disagree, I'm just rolling it through my head for those vendors that are doing that.
I assume the health department regs, but go ahead.
Yeah, all of the vendors currently have that in place. And even the trailers, they have come through and we have inspected them under the auspices of a health department check. But this just kind of closes the loop.
Gotcha.
And so they're already well aware of what they need to do.
Everybody okay with adding that language? We are cruising tonight.
Don't jinx us, Charlie.
Not that part.
Okay, on to community are we all done? Community promotions.
Mr. Mayor, council has submitted information with regard to their preferences as it relates to the 16 applications that came through the most recent community promotions program. It certainly would appear to me that based on the results that we were able to determine from the information you provided, that the total output would be just over $20,000, which, if I'm reading that correctly, and I remember the budget allocation that we were envisioning for this program, this would be an under budget request. And so the purpose of tonight's meeting is to confirm that indeed this is what council wants to do, provide additional clarification and perhaps amend what we see here tonight, and ultimately give us this direction so we can notify our applicants and prepare the budget accordingly.
It's been typical for us before we've gone through final approval with this process to give council members a chance to advocate for someone that didn't do very well in the process. See if anyone wants to make a case. One of the, I guess for me, the frustration was that it was an all or nothing on the in-kind and the facilities. And I know we gave Fluor those instructions, so it's on us, but I think in the future we should maybe consider giving ourselves the flexibility to give more funding. I didn't feel good about giving people nothing because their requests were really too large for us to fit into our budget. So any comments on this? Anybody want to make a pitch for a change to what we've done here?
Mr. Mayor, do you want to allow Fleur to make a clarification here?
Sure.
I don't quite follow.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but go ahead, Fleur.
No, you're fine. I just realized, I'm very sorry, Your Honor, members of council, this is an old version of your chart. We're printing new ones. This is the one that didn't have all the votes tallied in. And so we're printing the new ones, and we'll have it to you in just a moment. That'll show, I think over a few council members' votes in that aren't in this, so.
Does that mean then that the number we see on the bottom line here is incorrect?
Yes.
Oh, it does?
Yes, because it all tallies in, so.
Can we put a sticky note on this particular discussion and move on to the other one?
I think we better do that.
Is that all right?
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, to get the numbers right now and then try and make a,
Yeah, let's just
Yeah,
defer
flash
and we'll go
picture
through
on
this.
it.
Let's just move on. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I apologize.
All right, so on to the Wham resolutions. So you all received an email that Wham is requesting input from its members as to what its priorities should be and what issues we should be bringing before the legislature in the upcoming session. The process that Wham follows is the board will be meeting a week from Thursday to look at all of these suggestions. Some communities are very active and submit 3, 4, 5 resolutions each session, things that are of concern to them, and others are relatively silent. The board then discusses those and then a packet is put together for the June meeting, which is the annual meeting of Wham, where the entire membership then would decide what Wham will be basically pushing for in the 2020 session, 2020 session. So, so we, let's get this out here.
Does everybody have this memo? Oh, just want to be sure. Okay, okay, all right, thank you.
I've got too many pieces of paper here, so. Oh,
Should have the
excuse me. I better use yours, Carl.
No problem. Come back. Okay, feel free.
So the resolutions in front of you in this memo are essentially those that Wham had pushed for in the previous session. And some of these are of more interest to us than others. The prime example being the stormwater utility resolution, which was obviously a priority for us, and it was put in the Wham packet pretty much on our, as our request. So let's just go through these one at a time and see if we need to discuss them, if people want to support these when we get to that board meeting next week. So, Jolene, help me with note 1, okay? Because I didn't keep my notes from the meeting earlier. So,
This was
1 was actually the resolution number 4.
I believe so, Mayor. I asked Wham to give us a summary, which is much more succinct than looking through those. So this is a summary of all the Wham resolutions,
From the last session.
with the exception of thanking Mayor,
Right, of thanking the
Mayor
governor
Mead, or Governor Mead.
and Pinedale.
And Pinedale thing.
Okay.
So and I believe that they are in order of how they came through and the result of,
Oh, the results are there in red.
and the
Okay.
results are in red of what happened, what passed, what didn't pass. The only thing that passed through here was the, constitutional amendment, which will be on the ballot. And that was the only thing that went through the session, and that was the constitutional amendment on the sewer, on how much you can borrow for a sewer
okay,
system.
okay.
And that did go through, and that will be on a ballot for voters to change the amendment. Nothing else,
Yeah. Got results.
and
Item
then
14.
the air service passed, but no money. So everything else was main discussion or didn't make it out of committee or didn't pass.
So there were 2 different matters involving lien authority. The first one had to do with collection of unpaid utility bills essentially for absentee landlords, and giving municipalities the authority to place a lien on those properties so that we could collect those unpaid bills. Am I stating that correctly, Jolene?
Yes, sir.
So, Bob?
Surely in the interest of maybe saving some time, I'm not sure that my opinion has changed despite what the legislature did or did not do. And I don't know how other people feel, but I'm pretty much thinking we're still on track with all of them.
Well, there are a couple, though, that we had some controversy on, and this is a new council, and so I don't think they should be
Okay.
bound by a decision made by a previous council.
Well,
That's fine.
and/or I wonder if we could just go to the ones that anybody disagrees with.
I'll tell you what, let's just do this. I will go through them, just give a real brief summary, because, you know, when you're the rep, you have to spend more time with the language and understanding the background. So, that is the purpose of the first one. Would anybody have any concern with us supporting that? Okay. The second one is controversial, And it's basically us saying that the optional tax process in all cases requires us to get approval of the majority of the municipalities and the county before we can go before the public. The problem that we face is specifically right now would be that if we wanted to put something before the community to build a police station, for example, we cannot do that strictly to the people of Casper. The law doesn't allow us to. We have to do this in a coordinated fashion, and in our case, why would Mills or Evansville citizens want to vote for that? So the problem is that we don't have this specific authority. The argument that the people in the smaller towns and the counties make is Casper can pass a tax, and then we have to come in and pay it when we buy our groceries. So that's the issue. But I think, personally, I think we should have that authority. Chris?
I think that it's gonna bring up the con, if you will, that you just brought up, and I think that we have to think about our overall responsibility and not a specific project. And so I believe that the opposition to us having an exclusive right to be able to do this within the corporate city limits has a very valid point. We are certainly the commerce center for Natrona County, and affect everybody else that lives in or around us. And I believe everybody should have an opportunity to vote yes or no on, because the impact is indisputable to anybody outside city limits.
Mike?
Having, as always, the greatest respect for Councilman Walsh, I absolutely disagree with him. I think that any city, town, or municipality should have the authority to, to tax its own people. If they want to come here to shop, that's fine. If they don't, that's. I don't see it as being any different than if you choose to drive through Mills or Evansville and you get caught in one of their speed zones out there. You have to pay their thing, or anybody going through from anywhere. You could show up anywhere and say, oh, well, I didn't get to vote on this tax or that tax or whatever. I totally support that number 2, because I think it just makes sense for cities and towns to be able to tax their own people. Why should they have to go talk to people out? When we vote on something, we don't go out in the county and say, oh, geez, those of you out there, what do you think about what we're going to do here?
Other opinions about this?
I'd probably say I align with what Mike is saying. Give us that autonomy to be able to create that for our own municipality.
And just to be clear to everybody listening to this, it's not something we get to decide, it's something the people of Casper will
What I
decide.
meant is that our community gets that opportunity to decide that factor.
And I guess my frustration with the argument, Chris, is sometimes it's been framed as, well, you're aiming this at us. Well, we're not. We're really aiming it at our own citizens, or the citizens are aiming it at themselves with that vote. There's just a collateral problem that other people have to face. It's not intended to tax them intentionally for our police station or whatever it is we want to put before them. It's just they don't have the option because of what you said. But I don't view that as our fault that they have to come to Casper to buy their groceries. That's my opinion. So, Chris?
I don't suppose it's their fault. They could move into Casper. Maybe they don't want to follow current Casper rules, which is everybody's choice. But we have the luxury of looking at it through our exclusive lens. We don't live in Mills, or we don't, all of our grocery shopping isn't done in Mills. If it was, I'll bet we would have a different opinion of it. And, we're talking about passing statewide legislation, and statewide is gonna look at the broader topic, and they're gonna say, yeah, wait a minute, this is good for one community, not necessarily everybody that I'm representing, and I don't believe it is. I know that They use our resources, our fire, our police, everybody that comes into town, but that hasn't changed, and that's always been the case. And we can't cry poor because nothing's changed. But collectively, if we want to impose a tax, we're not talking about a fine or an internal rule or regulation. We're talking about a tax that does affect people disproportionately more than it would affect us.
Why?
Because
everybody pays the same.
no, because you don't care if Mills were to pass an ordinance saying it costs you more to get tires on your car, fuel, or food, because it doesn't bother you. You can stay in Casper. But when we contain most of those services, we affect all these people that are around us. And there's no way, they don't have to come to Casper to do it. They could drive to Rock Springs, they could drive to Denver, but unreasonable.
Ken?
Well, and I go with Councilman Walsh on this one. If we decide, the people decided to raise the sales tax, but then Mills or Evansville, they want to be a part of that. And I think back to the whole alcohol ordinance, and in a sense, if we pass what we were looking at with everything, everybody said, well, they'll just go to Mills or they'll go to Evansville, and we would lose that big of a profit. Kind of the same thing as if they choose to keep the taxes low, I'd rather go drive from PV area right down the street and do stuff at Mills, and that's going to give them more of my profit than it will Casper, because they didn't raise it. They have a lower tax, so I'm going to go there than to be in Casper, in all honesty, because my family, we would look at where we can save the money, and that's where we would save the money.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I look at this as the issue we've run into with our legislature essentially forever, and it's home rule. The legislature gives us lip service to home rule, but they don't allow it. Just as Wham had informed us a while back, we are the most dependent state on the state legislature for funding of any place in the country. And so I think this just gives us something that we need to have in order to operate our communities right. If a small community chooses not to do it, well, that's up to them. And I know from our sister cities, there is a little bit different feeling on taxes, period. But we have done things for the entire community, and everybody benefits from that. And I think it would be good for us if we had the ability to do it. Now, we're talking on the first optional 1 cent, and we're also talking the special purpose tax with the language that was put in there before, as I recall. So I just support it.
Well, I guess I'd also like to add that there are people outside of Casper that benefit from things that the city does. We subsidize the event center. It's not just Casper residents that go to the event center, but they don't pay that subsidy. We pay it. All of the citizens of Casper pay that.
Well, don't they pay part of the 1 cent? Everybody that's in the county?
True, but in terms of subsidizing, that comes out of our budget. And that's true for all of our facilities. I'm sure people outside of Casper come to our pools. We subsidize that. They don't pay for those things. And so they benefit from and I think they should. I would never want to say these things are only for Casper residents, but it should be a two-way street. If we need a major facility to build, and it's not going to benefit people outside of our community, we need a way to do that.
Mr. Mayor, I think, following along with what you said and what Councilman Hopkins said, I think that the real bottom line issue is, if Wyoming is a home rule state, and you're right, Bob, they sit there and mouth that, but then when it comes to things like taxation, oh no, you can do whatever you want to, except that, and accept that, and accept that, and accept that. And then when the cities have to go to them for money, they act like, oh, we're really doing something nice for you by giving you this money and everything. And my sarcasm is probably coming through on purpose, because I have a bad taste about that. And I think that the citizens of any town want to tax themselves, they should be allowed to do that. And if there's a collateral effect that someone else who passes through that town has to pay that, you know, so be it.
I guess I'd ask the people who haven't spoke to, you tell us which argument seems to be the strongest, and if we really are divided on this, we may just have to take a no position on this. Kristen?
Probably just a couple of comments more so than, groceries is not a great example, so we probably don't wanna use that one since a lot of groceries aren't subject to sales tax. So I mean, it's not like we're saying, well, you have to come
Point.
get your food
That
here, and you
comes
have to
later.
have food to
That's
live, and, oh, I agree, but I guess for this particular one in a vacuum, that's probably not the best example to use. But I guess on that point too, if there is something that I can't procure here and say I have to go to Denver and buy it, I understand that their citizens have voted on, you know, a 9.5% sales tax, whatever crazy number it's at. But I understand that, because I understand that I'm in their community and their citizens voted for it. I don't grumble and change my mind. I mean, it's just, it's their choice. I'm coming there to get my goods. So I think it's up to our citizens to vote for it, but they have to have the means to do that.
Bob, do you mind if you just kind of hear from Ray? Ray,
I already-
you did, you
yep,
kind of
I'm
agree with
supportive
Bob
of it.
and Mike. Steve, what do you stand?
No, I'm in support of it, and the exact same thing is, we go to other communities and we pay exactly what they put it out at, what they voted it to be, so it's no different here. It's not a matter of us treating Mills or Evansville or Barnett differently, we're treating everybody equally. Everybody that passes through our community is gonna pay it too, so.
So I think if I've got my count right, we're like 6-2. Is that right? Okay, I think that's pretty strong support. Okay, all right, let's go on to, let's do this quickly as we can, because we've got quite a few. Now, the resolution 3 is about the exemption that's in place primarily when energy companies come in and they basically book up a hotel and they're using those rooms for their workers. There's an exemption that they basically are given where they don't pay sales tax, and it is costly. This would be to replace that non-transient lodging tax definition of a transient guest. Julian, do you remember exactly what the definition is changed to?
I'm sorry.
Can you look at that while we go on to the next one, because I'm not in a position to explain that very well. Okay, number 4 is very controversial. The Wham board supported putting the tax back on food, not because we wanted to tax food, but because it's a significant loss of revenue. This council, I think unanimously, if I remember correctly, said, no, we're not with Wham on that. But again, we have a new council in place. The argument for putting it on is, if you don't, where else is the revenue going to come from? And no one seems to have a good answer for that. So, and it's been talked about as an exemption that should stay in place because it's regressive. Sales tax generally is regressive, but does anybody have an opinion about whether we should change our position from we want to see the exemption in place, which is the position we took, to let's put this tax back in place because we need the revenue?
Well, I'm not unanimous on this one either. If I recall correctly, the legislature promised us, there was nothing ever in writing, but they promised verbally, almost everyone of us, yeah, we are gonna give you that money back.
We're gonna find some mechanism to get it
Well,
back.
that's never occurred. They've done a little bit with the above the board, but they just haven't done it. And when I look at the amount of tax revenue that we would have lost with that, it's a pretty big number. And the people that really can't afford another penny tax on their food, quite honestly, there's an awful lot of them that get food elsewhere with a SNAP card. And so I don't mind paying another nickel for my grocery bill every month. And I've made the argument before that if you're a reasonable shopper, you can save that amount every week you go to the grocery store. Just look at the newspaper.
Bruce?
I'm not gonna surprise you guys with this. This is a matter of principle. Taxing a necessary commodity. I mean, you know, just go ahead and rewind a little bit of history. Because what do we get at the store? Tea? How'd that work? Why don't we tax the roads and the parks? Taxing food. That's, I don't know. Remember the oath you took and why you're here.
Just for my clarification, when did that go into effect? I know it was.
What, about 8 years ago, Bill?
Maybe
5,
10.
is that right?
6 or 8 years ago, yeah.
Okay.
It was just before the last attempt to get a library.
And,
Because we figured that
part,
might sell us.
I'm sorry, part of the context is Wyoming has 45, I think, exemptions. And it's, the cumulative effect of all of these exemptions is that sales tax revenues are significantly lower than they would be. And every time you talk about removing an exemption, there is a group that
Of course.
just goes ballistic about it, because this exemption has to be in place. And the position of Wham has been that we support only those exemptions that basically provide an economic stimulus to the state. That's the position of the Wham board, and then was for the larger body. So if we still have a majority that wants to keep that exemption in place, fair enough, but I didn't think that this council should be beholden to what a previous council voted for.
I'm in favor of keeping the exemption on the tax.
I am too.
Okay? I think you're on the minority side, Bob.
There you go.
All right, let's move on then. But we also have to understand that we're one of 99 municipalities, and just because we say that doesn't mean Wham as a whole will say that. Okay, number 5 is about the lien and assessment process, and this is basically to give cities the authority to basically make an owner pay when we have to go in and clean up a property or demolish a building because it's unsafe. And right now, we have very limited authority. You want to expound on that at all, Carmen?
That's right. I think this gave us a little more authority as it relates to getting the appropriate placement, Mr. Mayor, when it comes to priority for lien placement against a title and those kinds of things that previously we've had to struggle to be considered for.
Because basically you have to get in line.
Mm-hmm.
And this would basically move us further up the line as far as getting some relief or some compensation. Anybody have any questions about this? Do you understand what it's about? And you're okay with us going forward and supporting this one?
I think we should be number 1 on that priority. Really.
Well, we're the ones who are tearing down the building or doing what needs to be done.
Except the bankers will
Okay.
agree with us on that.
I was gonna say, you're not gonna be number 1. But.
Okay, 7, I don't know if we want to defer, this could be a lengthy discussion. The Wham board and then the Wham organization as a whole took the position that we would support any legislation that made it illegal to discriminate against people based on sexual preference or sexual identity.
Or did you skip
Highly
number 6?
controversial subject.
Did you skip number 6?
Oh, did I?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, I'm
the
sorry.
insurance program.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that. Yes. 6 we've already talked about in the context of our current dilemma. Is everyone okay with us continuing to push for getting eligibility, just the choice to join? Okay. All right. So, 7, we haven't had a chance to discuss, and it could be a lengthy discussion, so we may not be able to resolve this evening. I think you all know where I stand on it, but do we have a way to resolve this at this point, that whether we would support Wham's position?
Does everybody agree with that, or is there disagreement and a desire to have discussion on that?
Why do we have to designate?
Okay,
Every time
so
we have
we
to
disagree,
designate.
so let's move on.
Right?
Well, I mean, I think it is it's highly controversial, and it's an area that I think a lot of people, especially in the state legislature, don't want to deal with. But I think the reason is we're one of, don't quote me, we're one of 5 states left in the country that have some type of anti-discrimination law. Utah, which is even more conservative than we are, just passed it resoundingly in the state legislature, and I think that it's coming down the pike, and we're going to have to face that sooner or later as a state. And so we're one of 5, and I think and I understand the concern, like what Chris was talking about, because we went down that road last year, but I think it's coming, and I think, you know, Wyoming will probably be one of the last holdouts, I think, but it's going to come at some point. And I think Utah, like I said, which is a very conservative, very red state, came up, and the Republican governor was very positive about passing that legislation. So
I think my answer to your question, Chris, is this. Rightly or wrongly, I think, Wyoming is mischaracterized as a place.
I agree with you on that.
That is unfriendly and unwelcoming. We don't deserve it, in my opinion. But it is the reality that we are viewed as unwelcoming and unfriendly to people, both I believe racially and in terms of gender identity and sexual orientation. And one of the main reasons to do this is to make a statement and say we are in fact the equality state. We do in fact believe that everyone should have equal opportunity and be treated with respect regardless. And that statement, I think, would have an impact on economic development for the state and for our community. That's my argument, and I can't prove it, but I've talked to enough people that are the age of my sons who don't know anything about Wyoming, except I've heard that place is, you know, not a place you really want to go to, and I don't like that. So that message to me, that's my argument. Yes, it's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do.
Let me ask you this. Is there legislation concerning this in any manner or shape that you would oppose? Because what we're advocating here is just go do something for anti-discrimination. Can you narrow that to say, well, it depends on what it says?
Wham was just basically saying if something came up. Now,
Something. But what? We're talking about a law.
Yeah. Well, I think the main things were employment and housing.
Mr. Mayor, one of the things that you bring up, Councilman, a point I would say that we should consider in regard to this discussion is if in fact you would like to fashion a resolution that would frame the language, that opportunity exists to us as well. And so if this is too broad, one of the things that we could do is carry forward language that would define that a little more closely to submit for Wham's consideration as well.
So well, if the majority agreed, we
Correct.
could say that we will support this resolution with the caveat that it be consistent with a resolution to be passed by the city of Casper at a later date.
I don't even think we put it on, you know, we're not gonna be the ones that pass a state resolution. And we put in there, we support the concept of this, but reserve full support until we see what that legislation may be.
I think that's another way of saying what I intended. Exactly that we're not.
Well, yeah, but I don't want them to rely on us to write it for them. Or
No.
for whatever legislator wants to bring it forward. But if we support the concept, we have to reserve some opportunity to say, wait a minute, that might be too far, that might not be enough, that doesn't do anything.
Wasn't your idea though, Carter, that we would pass a resolution that would say we would only support it under these conditions?
Or that defines the scope. The city of Casper is opposed to discrimination when it comes to hiring practices, or is opposed to discrimination when it comes to public safety. We define the scope of which the city council would like to see legislation go forward, working against anti-discrimination in that narrow scope.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And then we would put that on a work session for us to define the limits of our support at a later date.
Correct, absolutely. And by the way, Mr. Mayor, for your edification as well, we did reach out to Wham and suggest that we might want to take a little more time to discuss issues that might have a little more debate like this one, so that we could craft a more tailored resolution pursuant to the direction of the
So
legislature.
it's not a
We
blanket.
do have that
It's not
flexibility.
blanket support.
Correct.
Carl, I'd just like to offer one very, hopefully brief thought. This reminds me of a conversation that I had with the guy that was the Republican state chairman, who's a real redneck guy, real good guy. At the point in time when the post-Matthew Shepard, when all those plays and all that stuff was coming out, and all the publicity and all that was really coming out, and he had one of the big national news organizations came, and they wanted to interview him and talk to him about this kind of a subject. And he said they didn't use a single word that he said, because what he pointed out was how many homosexual people there were in the legislature, in elected offices, in all kinds of things all over the state, and that nobody cared about what their sexual orientation was, that in Wyoming you were judged on, you know, what kind of a person you were, and what, you know, and where you were on issues and things like that, and what you did in private. Nobody cared about that. Well, he said they didn't want to hear that. He said the minute that he started talking, they just were, this was not the storyline that they wanted to hear or wanted to put forth about Wyoming, and they were closing their stuff up almost before he was done talking. And I think that that, to me, emphasizes what Mayor Powell is talking about. The image that's out there with a lot of people is just a false image, and I think we need to do some things statewide to make sure that that image is corrected. And while I agree a lot, probably a lot more than you might think, Chris, with some things that you come up with, you know, people can come up with some of these goofy things, but I think we really need to be on the forefront and be proactive.
Why don't we
with that.
how about if we do this? We'll just say we'll give sort of provisional support, but we'll have a future discussion as Carter suggests, and we'll tailor the terms as far as what we will or won't support. And if it crosses the line and it gets into something that is not in accord with that resolution, we withdraw our support at that time.
Sounds good to me.
Everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
All right, good deal. Okay, the resolution 8 is primarily a Laramie thing where they have the University of Wyoming, and they can't collect any taxes from those property taxes from those buildings, and they want to make sure that all government properties that they receive payment in lieu of taxes from the state, because they would normally get taxation from those buildings if they were in private hands. So it's relevant to us to some extent because we do have some state buildings here, but it's there are other places where Cheyenne and Laramie have a much larger burden with this. So if anybody wants to make an argument for or against, I guess the argument for is we have things that are of particular interest for us that may not be of interest to somebody else. We still want them to support us. And if we don't do it for them, why should they do it for us?
If I might add, this too is a constitutional question, and so similar to the other resolution that was passed on a constitutional basis, it basically would be asking the state to move it to a ballot kind of issue.
Oh, okay.
And so that fundamentally is the question.
Is everybody okay with us just going forward and just saying sure? Okay. 9 is relevant primarily to Sheridan, Cody, Gillette, and Riverton, I believe. Casper is not going to benefit greatly from this air service program as I understand it. But it would standardize the air service in the state and make it more predictable. It also makes it much more reliant upon state funding. So I don't know how you all feel about that, if we should take a position or just monitor it. We don't have to be for or against, we can just kind of say this isn't our deal. Kristen?
I'm trying to remember, this is for people who are on state-funded, like health insurance programs and such.
It would basically create a statewide air system.
Oh, okay.
It would
I'm getting rid of-
basically say, they would put it out to bid to a carrier and say,
I gotcha.
we want this many flights at this time to these locations, give us your best price. And they're basically designing the system that's gonna go out to bid, is my understanding. Am I saying this correctly, Carter? Is that your understanding? And that's what this group is in the process of doing, but they didn't get any funding to move forward. They just created the structure.
It subsidizes air service for those smaller airports.
Which is already going on.
Right.
It's just community, each community's on their own.
Correct.
Essentially.
I would say no position.
We just kind of let them work it out. Okay. Is everybody okay with that? Just,
I'm not.
all right, okay. All right, 10 is kind of the issue, it's more of a concept. Kind of saying what Bob said earlier, Mike said earlier, that we just need a little more control over our own destiny.
And request that it be assigned to an interim. That topic.
And they tried, the committee tried, but everything got shot down.
Correct.
Opinions?
I think on some of these things, we need to stay in there and keep slugging on them. Might take 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 legislative sessions.
Any other opinions? Want to give thumbs on whether we should support this or not? Okay, shoulder shrug, okay. All right, stormwater, we all know what the deal is here. We want the authority to create that utility. And I assume you newer folks followed this, right? And the importance of this. The way it stands right now, we could go ahead and pass an ordinance creating a stormwater utility. Before it would go into place, we would have to take it to the voters. This has been done in numerous communities, and it always fails, and it always fails for the same reason. I live up on a hill. I'm not gonna get flooded. And unfortunately, there are many, many people who are not at risk who would simply vote, no, I don't wanna pay another $5 a month. But the community as a whole is gonna suffer if our entire downtown gets flooded.
I mean, I do live like 250 feet higher than the city, but whatever.
Yeah, ask the people on Glendale Avenue, they're way upstream of the river,
But they're at risk, but a lot of people don't know they're at risk.
Maybe
So-
if they live there.
So anyway, are we all in favor of continuing to push this in through? Okay. All right. Some of these were duplicative. Did we take a position, didn't you, when you and I talked about this, Jolene, where did we land on 12, or did we just kind of say it's another concept?
He said it was another concept and we put that on our list, Mayor.
It's the same percent, basically saying similar to what 10 says, is to give us the authority and give us some stable funding.
Your Honor, they had a lot of, as we reviewed these, they had a lot of redundancy of trying to find money from municipalities. But your objective was to go through and.
Right. I want to give everybody a chance to go up or down on these. I guess what I would recommend is there is some duplication, and maybe the board has some work to do to consolidate some of these things into a briefer statement, because some of these resolutions got pretty lengthy. If it's okay with everyone, let's move on to, and 13 is the same. It's another statement that we need solid, stable, predictable funding to run a city. 14 is the one that Jolene referenced earlier, where for reasons unknown to anyone, there's an actual number in the state constitution in terms of the percentage of the amount of debt that you can assume for a sewage treatment facility. And so there are municipalities that need to take on more debt to get a major facility done, and they can't because of this constitutional limitation. And so the idea here would be to basically change that number or get rid of the number altogether. Again, I don't know why they would put a number in a constitution. So anybody have a problem with that?
It's the same reason we put a time on our sign
Yeah,
downtown.
good point. Okay, 15 was us, one more time talking about extraterritorial jurisdiction. There was a sense amongst the board that, you know, they wanted us to see how this played out and if any real problems developed. Looks like one just developed in Mills with the trucking company, and the city Mills couldn't do anything about that. They had no say in a facility that created a lot of noise and problems for their residents, but they had no say because it wasn't within their city limits. So personally, I think we should relax about this for a little while. We lost, let's deal with it, and eventually we'll try to change it back if we can. That's, I think we tried pretty hard and we failed. Unless somebody really wants to charge into this thing again. Well, I'm not sensing a lot of appetite for that. All right. Okay, 16, Carter, I'm gonna need some help with. This is about who actually collects the money, and what happens is municipalities have to wait before it all cranks through the state apparatus before we get paid. Whereas if the city collected it themselves, they would have it earlier. Did I say that correctly?
Furthermore, Mr. Mayor, we get to retain the money that cities and towns pay to the state to do that service on their behalf.
Oh, okay.
And the research would indicate that those states that have, you know, decentralized that effort, states actually do save money. Or cities, I should say. Cities and towns save money by doing that.
Okay. Chris?
Do we have to incur additional staff, additional technology, all that in order to do this ourselves?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that probably would be the case, but what that research would indicate that despite that ramp up in those fixed costs, there still would be savings to the city and town that goes that route.
I would want to know what we pay the state and what we estimate we would end up having to build our force to be able to handle it.
We haven't looked into any of that, have we?
No, we have not.
Okay, this was a Sheridan deal, if I remember correctly. Because they had done that, those calculations, and we're convinced it would save them money. But we can just sit by, we can stay on the sidelines with this if you want to. Kristen?
Obviously, we're all still very aware and licking wounds from when we got told that we had this enormous bill out of nowhere that really at the end of the day couldn't even be proved to us as to why or records divided or anything. This eliminates that. This this takes away waking up one morning and having a call saying, P.S. I just need $1.5 million, like just right now. I can't tell you why. I can't show you where I calculated it from. You just need to give it to me. This takes that away.
That's a good point. There is a connection there. That's correct. Well, would you all want to find out more about the actual benefits that we would receive before we go forward with support of this?
Cost of
How about if we were to say we will support this, but we reserve the right to withdraw that support if our own analysis says it's going to cost us more than we'll get?
That's fair.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Now the last two are items that we discussed as possible resolutions to support. And there's just been some loose discussion of these matters. As when Wham did their analysis of the the volume 1 and volume 2 of the history of how cities and towns have been financed, and looked through some recommendations, and again, by way of context, that was done because the legislator kept saying, look, every time we try to do something, all you guys do is complain. you never give us any ideas of what we should do. So Wham took that feedback and said, okay, we're gonna analyze all of this and we're gonna come up with some recommendations. One of them was to look at the property tax structure, because the up and down nature of the sales tax curves, property tax curves are never that extreme. They go up and down, but they're more predictable over time. And so, but there is no way to increase property taxes because they are also capped in the state constitution. So there's some discussion of whether that should be on the table to push for, again, getting a number out of the Constitution so that the legislatures can, as an elected body, make their own decisions about these things. And I don't know if there are other municipalities that would support looking at that. I know there are some. Whether there's broad support, I can't say. But the goal would be to kind of get us less dependent on that sales tax curve. And that too could be something where we could just sit on the sidelines and say, let's discuss this more before June comes around. Do you want to say anything more about that, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, Council, I think our friends and colleagues on the county side of this debate would not like this option, in that it would threaten their monopoly of those very stable, predictable revenue dollars. Just as a heads up.
It would be a battle.
It would be. Okay.
Was something like Chris? Go ahead.
So we got this an hour and a half ago, and
you're right.
we're talking about amending the Constitution.
That's a fair statement.
I think I am adequate to do that on zero notice and broad concept.
That's a fair statement, although it was in those reports.
It was in the what?
It was in those finance reports that Wham put together. I'm not arguing with it, I'm just saying.
Oh, it almost sounded like it. If I didn't look at Wham's financials.
We haven't had a discussion in here about it.
Okay.
And it's been a while since those reports came out, so it's not an idea that hasn't been kicked around before.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would support it. The bottom line is that we as individuals do not pay our fair share to run the state of Wyoming. We put all of that burden, well, 60-some% of it, on the minerals industry. And I think sooner or later, we're gonna have to bite the bullet and start paying our way. And while I think you're right, obviously the county would oppose this, there wouldn't be a lot of support. But I think we need to let them know that we really want them to do something. You know, they've stood pat since we've become a state on this cap. And maybe it's time you take a look at it. So, I would support it.
It is. Chris's point is valid. I mean, to throw something at this and try to ask people to vote on it. But so let's just sit on the sidelines. This was just about putting something out on the table for discussion, because again, well, and Bob stated very well, the revenue committee essentially did nothing as far as addressing the long-term revenue problems we face. So it's not something I want to fall on a sword for.
You know, I just wonder as a whole package on this. No, we didn't see anything that came out as beneficial on these from the last session. But when I look at this, look at all the different methods that we're talking about, is it, you know, when we're just talk about the taxing, there's 5 or 6 different, very driven, separate agendas trying to be wrapped in the umbrella of Wham, or should, as an organization, all that taxing and all those things be bunched into one basic statement, and then cities with special and unique needs can make their point on that with an overarching support. Did we shoot ourselves in the foot? Because, and I'm asking you as much as anything, because I believe we did, and I do not believe that Wham helped us out in any manner in this. I think they were part of the problem. And there's so many different things. we'll have a different need than Lusk will have. And so it's hard to get together on specific points, but on broad concepts you can.
Well, obviously, each municipality has their own unique situation. And we have had, well, the direct distribution formula is a good example, where how the over-the-cap money or the direct distribution money is distributed is very controversial. There's been this hardship designation that certain communities, because of their economic conditions, need to get a higher percentage per capita than, say, Gillette, when they were doing well. Maybe now they would might qualify. But every formula that you have has winners and losers. And so the losers are going to look at how much they get and say, I don't like that formula. The winners are going to say it's good. And that's been a dynamic that's just played out within Wham for years. So you're right, you're never going to have unanimity of support for everything. The flip side to that argument is that when the legislators are dealing with all of the things that they have to deal with, and what's important to us is a relatively small part of what they have to deal with in their session. When there is internal conflict, that gives them an easy way to say, we're just not going to do anything. You guys can't agree amongst yourselves. We don't know what to do with this. We're done. Okay, and so the only way to really effectively advance an agenda is to try to find some consensus and speak as one voice. And we've done pretty well with that, with some things. It's not an accident that we continue to give the direct distribution money, despite the fact that this has been a very difficult period of time financially for the state. Wham played a very significant role in making sure that that was solid. And we'll never know if we would have gotten that money without Wham's efforts. So that's my response. I think trying to do things as 99 municipalities is always going to be more effective. So let's just try to finish this. The last one addresses the situation that Kristen just brought up, and we have we were the poster children for we were the poster child for this problem, and we really just. And we have some legislative support for this, to say, look, when a mistake gets made, there ought to be some penalties. And we shouldn't be the only ones to suffer when a serious error of this sort is made. And money goes to one municipality when it should have gone to another. And in my opinion, it's not about punishing people so much as about creating incentives so they don't make these mistakes in the future. So we made the recommendation. This actually happened, I believe, after the resolutions. Wham resolutions had all been pretty much hammered out, and so it was too late for us to really, I think, get that in. But I would, obviously, I feel like we should push for some legislation that holds the revenue department accountable, but also holds the companies accountable when they make that mistake. Well, other opinions about this? Yeah.
I got an opinion on the whole thing, in all honesty. All these have been denied or passed for how long now?
Well, this was our 2018 resolutions.
Okay. I guess I just have a problem with that it got the email that this was going to be thrown at us, and maybe it happens often with the council, of stuff like this, and we have to make a decision whether we're going to go with it or not go with it. I know that some of this has been put to us, and I haven't read every single part and studied up on it. So I guess my opinion, my personal opinion, is I wouldn't have even, I didn't sit here and give a thumbs up or thumbs down really for most of them, just because I would have liked to done more research, and I should have. That's my fault because it has been out there. But I guess to say, give us a thumbs up if we're going to go through, because next week we're doing this. To me, it was a blind shot.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it felt like a blind shot to me, and I don't agree with it at all. Because I haven't done enough research. Not that it hasn't been out there, that's my fault. So
No,
I'm
I mean,
just saying.
I started the whole discussion with an apology to all, because I really should have seen, I was thinking ahead to June instead of to April, and that was my mistake.
So-
Because I know that these things will be finally approved in June, and I thought we had time, and I just basically didn't connect the dots that there's an interim board meeting, and that's the one that's a week from this Thursday. So, Ray?
I think the years that I've been on council, a couple things that I've learned. One, completely understand things get buried, things happen. I get it. I'm sitting in that chair, so I understand exactly. So don't even worry about it. I think the next part about it is that sometimes on council we do get these things. We do get some things that come and hit us, and we've got to make that, and we've got to talk about it. And it does take a little bit longer to be able to do those things. And it has happened. And the good part about it is having that discussion. To be a part of it, and so I wouldn't worry about it. Charlie.
Well, I think in the board meeting week from Thursday, you know, I want to represent this council. It's, you know, I have my personal set of beliefs, but it's my job to represent all 9 of us. And so that's obviously why we needed to do this tonight, so that I could have a sense of how to do that properly. That doesn't mean we can't change our opinions about some of these things over time as we investigate them and look at them and say, you know, we changed our mind on this, or we want to see this language changed. The situation isn't that fixed. And when the meeting happens in June, these resolutions only become actual Wham resolutions, not at the board meeting, but at the general meeting that happens in June. And there can and should at times be a robust debate within the membership about that. And then there are designated voting delegates. And so it's a democratic and very transparent process. But it will only be finalized in that June meeting. And I encourage you all to come for that reason and other reasons, to participate in the process. Right now, I'm just trying to get a sense so that I'm not off base when I go to the board meeting week Thursday.
Mr. Mayor, I promise I'm not going to beat a dead horse here on this matter, but the resolution process with Wham is a relatively new process that with respect to this time frame and this timeline and so on. Certainly I would agree that the newer council people are at a little bit of a disadvantage with regard to a number of these issues, because most of these have been discussed by this council a number of times. Some of them are new concepts, as Councilman Walsh pointed out. Some of them are things we've tried before and would like to try again, and those kinds of things. I assure you, however, Wham is not going to turn away a resolution, for example, along the lines of the anti-discrimination discussion that this group wants to have, pertaining to what you would like to deposit for Wham to consider. And so we've got time, we can work it through, we can work it over, and feel good about the product that you turn into Wham. We're going to stand by that commitment to, and Wham will too, to allow those kinds of well thought out debates be brought forward by this council.
And having gone through this process over the years, I guess I'd also like to add that the lack of success at something like the stormwater utility is not a reason to quit.
Right.
Because there is a gradual movement toward acceptance of an idea that happens over time. And you just keep pushing it, and it eventually carries the day. And I've seen that happen over and over again. And sometimes we just have to be persistent over time.
Well, kind of along the same lines, Charlie, I think the next session coming up is a regular session. So it's a 40-day session. And, you know, just the way our legislature has always worked, since we put in the budget session, what, 20 years ago maybe? It's always been a time crunch. They've got to get everything done in 20 days. So the fact that it didn't make it through a budget session is just what you say, Charlie. That's not time to quit. We have to keep going back and keep going back. Sometimes there's a lot of bills that come through that have been before the legislature 3 and 4 times before they're actually passed, and that's not unusual.
So, you know, I think I've got a sense of where we stand with all of these things, and I will be careful to give the necessary caveats where we're not absolutely certain of where we stand on these things and don't want to give full support. And with others, I think I can pretty confidently say we're behind this. So, and they did ask for a delegate to be designated. I will offer to do that, but anyone else can step forward and ask for a vote on that. Unless someone wants to volunteer and say, I'd rather do it. Okay.
You got it.
I got it. Good enough.
You see the train go by?
Anything else on Wham resolutions? And again, my apologies for throwing this in at the last minute. It was unfortunate, but I think we got through it. Okay. On to sidewalk cafes.
Are we jump back there?
Oh, we're back to
ready.
community
Yeah.
promotions. Okay.
Oh. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, and I apologize for this disruption on this particular topic.
I thought we were gonna do this a different day.
Oh, I think we're ready to tackle it tonight, but if you want more time, we certainly can take that too. Absolutely. Are you handing out these or?
Yes.
Okay.
I just didn't know.
This is okay, thank you. I thought we had multiple.
We have enough for about more than we need.
Right, that's what was on sent to us.
Yes, exactly.
So, okay,
And so, the most interesting one is this one. Yeah, you literally didn't have a description of what the. Nothing.
Would anyone like to make a suggestion? Personally, I would like to give partial funding to the hockey club for facility use. Maybe $5,000.
I've
Completely
been
blank.
to it a few times, so I know.
This should be closely resembling what you got electronically recently. Right, Cliff?
Yes.
Yep. And the good news is, this number is even further under budget. So, thank you for that.
I mean, again, the way we set it up, it's all or nothing.
Let's split it up. Yep.
Kristen?
Me too, especially just on the point, right back to the reminder of this isn't about, you know, well, this is a good organization that does good purposes more so than this one. This is about bringing people outside of Casper to Casper. And the hockey club brings people outside of Casper to Casper. So, in theory, about what these dollars are for, they're a pretty good one to give some support to.
And I just throw that number out there. If somebody has another number, or Ken?
I agree with you on how much did you say?
I said 5.
5,000.
5 total or 5 added to the final result?
5 just for facilities.
Cause
I see.
Just to the
I
facility, just take that 0 on the right column of facilities and put 5,000.
Perfect.
I'd actually like to see almost any of the facility requests. I'd like to see all of them given the full amount and then differ for the hockey club, that amount as far as that goes. 'Cause that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6.
So some of these are fully funded, because
Well,
we got the 50%.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, I'm saying, we got the money, we gotta get 25, I'm saying, instead of, if we're gonna do that, I'd like to see, I guess instead of the 500, keep it at 1,000.
Well, all of them, all of the facility requests will get 50%, cause it's a
50%,
matching
yeah.
fund thing.
Correct.
Okay.
So if it says 500 on the right-hand side and it says 1,000 under the facilities requested, then they are getting the full amount that they requested.
And that would be their expectation as well, when they made the, it should have been anyway. So that's the only suggested change I would make. I don't know. Chris?
Yeah, when I'm looking at the final result on the soccer club, And to me, this money is to bring in outside people. I would say that T-Bird Track is a local event exclusively, and I didn't fund that at all, but you got the soccer club saying 2,300 players on, you know, the Fall Classic. And I don't even know what I wrote on that one. 2,900 players on the Casper Spring Jamboree. 3,000 people on Wellness State Cup, and the final result is total combined of everything. Why would we not be putting money towards the ones that are bringing people in here?
So they did get everything they asked for, because these
They got
ones
about
didn't ask for any cash.
$2 grand total for all of their stuff.
It's not this.
Oh, no, you're
No,
right,
this
that
is
one doesn't
mine.
have,
This is mine, but what is this final result? That's what I put in my worksheet. So when I'm looking at this sheet, final result, is that the final result? Is that the
Yeah.
number? What is this?
The in-kind is 50, in-kind and facilities request is at 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So that's your total. 50% of what the in-kind request was, let's just take number 6. It was 101.50 plus the 560 is 661.50. That's 50% of the entire.
but, so, I think that's what you're saying, on this one though, it shows total cash.
Yeah, and so what I'm looking at, the one that, so the worksheets we did are not corresponding with what the actual results on the payment is.
Oh, shoot. I think they are, sorry, I was misreading it as well.
That's-
Cause these ones didn't request cash, there we go, cash requested 0.
Mhm.
So the total request was before the 50% allocation. That's why, sorry, that's why it's like half.
Fleur, didn't we pretty much give the soccer club everything they asked for?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see that, I see that now.
So based on what I worked on, what I was provided and what I see here, it's just take our word for it.
Mr. Mayor, do you mind if we work through that a little bit? Fleur, as I understand it, the final result is a tally. So when I see final result, I'm looking at the 17.2. That 17.2 is inclusive of both the cash suggestions to this point from council, as well as the out-of-pocket costs that we would incur to support the in-kind requests as well.
And facilities, correct.
And facilities. So that 17.2 should be a comprehensive number of all the varieties of ways that we can help each of these agencies.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So
And-
for example, when you just added the 5,000, that actually takes that 17 up to 23,293, even though that was a facilities request, if you will, at whatever percent that works out.
If everyone agrees with
If
that.
everyone
It's
agrees,
still
that's
on the-
correct.
It's still on the table.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And if I may, Your Honor, members of council, the following pages are all your voting results. So if you want to see how you voted and see how it worked out, you can flip to each page. So first you'll have cash, then the in-kind, and then the facilities. They're all tallied. You can see the votes and how we averaged it out.
Well, and my point is, when I'm doing it on this one, and then I see what the final number is, I, take my word for it, right?
Well, because what we tried to do, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, is get some sort of amalgam of direction from the council, either by majority vote or whatever, to come up with a number that represents what your total spend would be.
I see it, so it's this.
Yeah, this is the representation of the total request, which is what we did if you turn in one of these forms.
Yeah.
And then when I see the final result, why would I have any indication that those two numbers are exactly the same? Do you see where I'm coming, my frustration?
I think so, I think so.
So when we talk about Casper Soccer Club number 3, they requested 1203. With the in-kind and all that kind of stuff, that actually translates out to 601. When I'm looking at my working sheet that I've got and I say, well, I put in for 1203, and it's, well, yeah, that's what it is. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Let me see if I can restate it.
I understand it. I'm trying to see if you understand my frustration on it.
Because I do want to understand your frustration, because if there's something we need to fix in the way we do this. I'd be the first to try to help you get that done. You're saying the disparity between what you suggested and what actually showed up in the final result is unclear to you. Is that right?
I understand now, but when I filled out this sheet
Oh,
that
I
I got
gotcha.
from the city, it's crystal clear that my intention is, okay, put down this amount. And then when I see the one that we get just recently, and it shows half, you can understand why I've got a question saying, why aren't we funding them more?
Yeah.
And I'm told, well, no, that is full. When this outcome, this worksheet can be presented in this same format as we're filling it out so that it reflects that number.
Right. Yeah.
Steve?
So essentially, that worksheet should have said either 50%, or if the people needed that amount of funding on that worksheet, they should have asked for double.
Gotcha. Right, because Mr. Mayor, in order to make that number work up to what they really wanted, understanding the limitations that council has put in with regard to 50% is all that they can really get with regard to $1,000 sort of request.
Because you're under budget, but you're under budget because we gave them the full amount on that sheet, and you gave them half the amount on this sheet.
Now, certainly, Mr. Mayor, council can say that 50% rule is not a rule we want to abide by anymore. And if indeed council wants to move to a $1,000 facility request versus a $500 because of the 50-cent rule, we can do that too. And you guys obviously have that ability to change that right now if you wanted to.
Well, that's what
You know, I'm not going for or against the 50% rule. When I was working on this, you'll notice there's nothing up here that says 50% rule.
Sure, okay.
Okay, and there's nothing up there, and then there's a caveat of, let's try and maintain that 25 grand. I try and maintain 25 grand because we're gonna spend a lot of money on stuff that's not gonna stop the world if we don't spend it.
Yeah.
This is gonna bring an economic impact into us, and the money that I think is $25,000 is 17. That can't be rationalized in my mind as anything other than intentional. And if it's just us from looking at this from completely polar opposite sides of things, I can tell you what I did was not how it was going to be translated out.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Sure.
And so I'm going to make a case that that was manufactured to bring this in even lower. And it's the conspiracy theory in me. So I don't want to, I want to make my point that this is horribly frustrating to me.
Okay.
And we can do a better job on it.
I'm going to suggest that we try to fix this sheet so that it's something that we can all live with, regardless of formulas, regardless of how it was done. And then before we ever do this again, we're going to carve out a half hour and say, how do we want this to done and how do we want to, because I believe Fleur did exactly what we asked.
I think she's got it right here.
Yeah.
If
So-
we could make this into our worksheet,
Yeah.
where we would have that representation of.
But we can't go back in time. You know, we're sitting here. Were you waiting to say something? Okay. Were you waiting to say something? Yes.
Just one quick point. The other challenge that we had too was a lot of the spreadsheets that Fleur sent out under one operating environment didn't translate that well with regard to trying to work from iPads and that kind of thing to see those formulas play out on the spreadsheet. And so that was a frustration of ours too, in that we had to do, and many of you, because many of you went through a conversion step to try to make those numbers work. And some of you just brought it in handwritten because it was too frustrating, which I understand. And it didn't work as well from that communication standpoint. So if council would like to take another run at this, we're supportive of that too, whatever we need to do.
How about if we do this? Let's make it. Let's do what I started, which was I think we shorted the hockey club, and I think we should give them $5,000 for their facilities request. we could do the same thing with the soccer club or with any of these other ones. If we could see if we could get this done and finish this tonight, rather than fill out a whole nother set of spreadsheets.
All right, but when you say $5,000 for facility, you're talking about 2,500.
No.
Yeah.
Which one do you want? Because that would be actually under a 50% request.
I'm talking about this number. This is just my proposal. You guys can do. I'm saying $5,000 in this cell right here.
I say make it
Which cell?
easier.
A3.
I don't have numbers here. You know, column H. I don't know. Kristen.
I'd almost say take it a step easier and say the remainder amount, assuming calculating in the 50% breakdown, would go to the hockey club and facilities.
Well, unless we want to give some to the soccer club.
The soccer club is maxed out for what they asked for.
Soccer club looks full, and so.
So say that
They
again,
were
Kristen?
they were very conservative in the
So
request as
there's
well.
roughly what, 1725, so a little bit less than 8,000 left, so ultimately 16,000 in facilities to the hockey club, which
Okay.
boils down to the 8.
That's on the table, unless someone wants to advocate for some other group they thought got shorted here.
I'm going to advocate for a group, and I want you to know that this is a very personal thing for me, only because I know the person that does it, and it's the Juneteenth program. And that does not bring in people, so it's contrary to things, but it does address a certain group of our citizens, and it's a very small request, and the reason I believe in it is because I believe in Reverend Pierce and what he does at those, and I've been to him. And so while I'm talking on both ends of my mouth, while I say don't fund the Casper T-Bird trek, I'm saying this is good for us. This is good for our community, and it doesn't cost us that much, and I'd like to see it fully funded.
Anybody want to change their vote on that? I voted yes.
I voted yes too.
Just for clarification, the only reason I voted 0 across that event entirely is there was no event description on the application. And I didn't previously know what that event was. And so I had no idea what it was, whether it was sacrificing.
I get it. No, I understand.
I don't know.
If I may, Mr. Mayor. Reverend Pierce was, and I had several people that were very good counsel to me while I was police chief, and he was one of them. And I also know that he's gone through some health incidents and some stroke issues. So, and I also know that he was not on the ball with turning in paperwork and taking care of the clarification things. But even with that said, even with no valid justification for bringing anybody in, I think it's a good thing.
Well, you could certainly say that Casper having a vibrant Juneteenth celebration addresses some of that image stuff that I talked about earlier.
Let's do it.
So, does anybody else who gave a no vote wish to change their vote? Because we need to get 5 thumbs up. I've already voted yes. So, as those of you who voted no, they would have to change your vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that I know what it is.
Do we have, let's get thumbs up on imitate the image, just so I can
I think.
get a clear sense, yes, okay, so that carries the day and Reverend Pierce gets his $500. Any other arguments in addition to the hockey club?
I'll stand pat.
Okay,
I would just back what Kristen said then, if everybody's good with it, the balance is left after taking care of Juneteenth, give that to the hockey club.
everybody okay with that?
With a clarification, because I still don't know what we're looking at. When we're talking about the fair, all right, we're roughly half. We're less than half on this one, and this is going to be here. I just want to make sure that you know, the fair brings in a lot to us. What I've been told from the event center is CNFR, single biggest clustered event, and the high school events, the teams, these soccer deals, the fair obviously is a big one. So I want to make sure that we're not cutting them out just because it's the county and they're on their own. But it's relatively proper.
Here's the big one they didn't get.
And I didn't really think they'd get that. What kind of in-kind are we talking about on that?
Security. They want us to pay the full cost of security.
And what do we typically do?
Nothing.
Have they paid it all?
I believe so. Now, since you brought it up, you could make an argument that us making a small contribution to the security would be a good gesture to the county. And most of the people who go to the fair are residents of the city of Casper, the majority, I assume. And you know, it might make sense to, but again, the spreadsheet didn't allow us to do partial funding the way we set it up. So
Can
That 28.9, that's for security at the fairgrounds?
that's what I understand.
It's all event center staff that go down to the fairgrounds and work. So it would be our security people from the event center pulling the tickets and doing the security outside us volunteer deputies.
So an alternative would be stay with $5,000 for the hockey club and give whatever is left toward the security at the fair.
Besides the 500 or the additional.
What is 500 for and still stay under the 25?
What would be
Be about 3,000, wouldn't it? 2,000.
For the leftover, if we just did 5,000 for the hockey club, yeah, it would be about roughly 3,000, a little bit under.
And that includes the 500 from Reverend Pierce?
Well, it wouldn't be full 500 because he's already
No.
allocated $399.29.
Oh, I see.
So it would be in addition.
Okay, so we just, so it's a relatively small increase. Good point.
Yeah, 286 bucks.
So, does anybody want to argue against giving some money for security at the fair?
That'd be okay.
We're still giving them 10% of what they asked for. It's a gesture. Okay, so the proposal would be $5,000 hockey club, the full 500 to Reverend Pierce, and then whatever's left over under the 25 goes to the fair for security.
2,421 on that.
Thank you, sir.
He nerd.
Thumbs up on that proposal.
Somebody had to do it.
Is that clear enough, Fleur?
Check my math.
Unless you guys want to talk about community promotion some more, we're going to move on to Sidewalk Cafes. Sidewalk Cafes, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and I appreciate your patience on that discussion, and we shouldn't have to have that discussion for another year. So
Let's never have it again. Flora, you take over and make sure
We're
all
gonna-
that stuff comes out.
Chris, we're going to do that the same night we talk about the parkways.
About the what?
The parkways. Parking on the parkways.
The parking on the parkways and wayfinders. We've stopped using words. We use funny things.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor and council, this discussion is at least 2 years old with regard to when the initial request came in by one of the proprietors downtown who suggested that we needed these kinds of features to our downtown to help with its vibrancy and bringing people into the downtown core. The basic concept is allowing for portions of the public sidewalk to be used for effectively what becomes an expansion of the respective restaurant service area into the outdoors and again into the public's corridor. The city attorney has been working on legal opinion with regard to that viewpoint and ways in which that if council wanted to go in this direction, that we could permit those kinds of uses to happen downtown. There's a couple of things that make this conversation interesting. Some portions of the downtown have rather wide sidewalks, and some portions of the downtown have pretty skinny sidewalks. And so a full implementation of this, if indeed we want every property owner that has a restaurant and those kinds of things to have full access to a feature of its nature, we have to be rather creative in making that happen. Because again, some sidewalks accommodate it better than others. With that, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if I could defer to Mr. Henley to kind of walk us through some of the nuances of this program and potentially a recommendation, we would be happy to take your direction accordingly, and we can prepare whatever we need to by way of formal adoption, if council would like to see that happen.
Mr. Hill?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This is a really tough exercise, I think, that you'll go through to do this. And looking at this for a very long time, it was virtually impossible to see how this could be done given the constraints of federal and state law. Of course, that's a local law in addition that would prohibit it. And so we're looking at basically navigating and trying to puzzle together some type of weaving that can get us through all of those difficulties. The difficulties that I think we need to be particularly cognizant of are the federal law, Americans with Disability Act. We need to maintain at least a 5-foot, and we've been using a 6-foot walkway as just the city policy in our downtown corridor. So that needs to be maintained. If we don't do that, we're just begging to have a lawsuit filed against the city of Casper. In addition, we have to be careful. We have a couple of state law problems which are pretty huge. One would be the constitutional requirement that we cannot make a donation to a private entity unless it's for the necessary support of the poor. And so, so we have that to contend with. We say, well, you, Mr. Restaurant owner or bar and grill owner, are going to be able to do this, but we're not going to get anything out of it. But you're going to be able to do it. We've actually made a donation to them to be constitutionally prohibited. The other one, though, is that the streets in Wyoming law is defined as including the sidewalks and walkways and right-of-ways. And so therefore, we have title to that, but the title is a bit restricted under Wyoming law. We kind of hold that property in trust for the purposes by which it was dedicated, transportation purposes. And so here, if we say we're going to block it off, we're going to hold part of that back. Again, it's something we need to be cognizant of and be creative in trying to work around. The way that we have, well, when we have existing city ordinances, those are basically that under the alcohol provisions, we don't permit people to sell or deliver malt beverages or alcoholic beverages on a publicly owned sidewalk. They shall not be used for taking orders or conducting sales. And then, in addition, we have another code section which is really more in the downtown sidewalk businesses area. And no thing should obstruct the sidewalk or street in any way, except in the event of an authorized temporary use of the sidewalks if found justifiable by the city council and in the public interest, such as crazy day sales, things of that nature. So, in addition, then there's some practical concerns which I imagine that you will face and we will hear about. You know, some business owners have purchased property where they can do this on their own private property, and now you're letting other competitors come in and compete against them when those competitors didn't go to the expense of buying their private property or leasing property that's private as opposed to public. Options, if you want to consider it, and these would be options that we need to go through a number of steps, would be basically permitting people to utilize the property on a temporary basis, and at the same time paying the fee to the city for using that. But, and I tell you, the reason we come around to this would be more like the mobile vending parking permit discussion that we had. You know, because we cut out an area of the parking space, which is part of the street, but we let vendors come in there to use that, but they have to do it on a very limited basis, only certain days of the week for certain times of those days. They have to pick up, go, and then come back in. They have to pay a fee, so it is a very temporary. It's not type of a permanent sale. We're not leasing it to them permanently. We have regular requirements they have to meet. So in that regard, it gives us at least some defenses if we were to be brought into a lawsuit by someone saying, hey, look, this just is beyond what we have authority to do so. And so in that regard, we would need to have the same type of requirements, I think, that we would have for the food trucks for these sidewalk cafes. You have to come in. We would basically have a methodology by which you could come in And for a certain period of time over the year, maybe October to, or April to October, May to October, something along those lines, we could erect some barriers for part of the sidewalk, so long as we had that ADA walkway. And you could put out seats and have your restaurant or beverage service out there, along with some, well, if you were to make the changes in the ordinance. But then you have to, again, bring those back in, and I know that would be difficult for some people, but certainly you have the ability now that people can do that. You see some restaurants taking their chairs and tables in every night anyway. Here you're going to have some type of a barrier that would let people know that there's a restaurant there. It's not a walkway anymore. You need to go around it. And those could be brought into it. Again, you just have to have a good temporary barrier that you could place up and then take down on a daily basis. So those would be kind of the thoughts that the city attorney's office has on if you want to go down this road, and it will be, I think, you'll find out, I think, probably just like you did with the mobile vending parking permit, that there will be probably a lot of signs addressing this both pro and con. We looked at the vibrancy by permitting the mobile vendors to be downtown. Kind of a similar argument here, I think, because you do see people down in the Boulder area. Gillette has some design criteria, and they permit some sidewalk cafes up there as well, and they have, of course, the same street laws and federal laws that we do. So looking at those, I think there are probably ways to navigate it, but it certainly isn't going to be easy, and I think we need to be really cognizant, though, that we don't get out there and violate some law where we're not going to have at least a good defense should we get called on.
Questions? I think this originally, if I may, Ken, I think this originally came to us, John, with a request by a specific restaurant not to do this on the sidewalks, but to basically utilize the parking spaces in front of the restaurant, which is a whole nother issue in terms of use of public space. Can you comment on that, or did I miss?
No, I think as I remember, I think that there was a restaurant down on the Center Street, and they wanted to create a bump out. So basically, they were going to take some parking spaces and decommission them just for use of that restaurant. And in my mind, I don't know how you get around that, but that would definitely be a violation of the Constitution in my mind. Now, if you could do that on a temporary fashion, again, that's a lot of moving in and moving out, and restricted use. You might be able to get away with that, but again, then you have the neighbors saying, boy, you're taking out not only your own sidewalk for purposes of this, but now my customers can't come and park in the downtown because you've taken up 3 or 4 parking spaces. So again, it's a controversial thing, but there may be ways to navigate it if you want to go down that road. But there's going to be a lot of push back and pull depending on which way you want to go.
I think Ken was first, and who else had a hand up?
No, I just got a comment.
Let's Ken, I think you were first. Go ahead.
In your email that you sent out about it, you also mentioned, and maybe I missed it while I was reading, it's talking about cafes, but you brought up in the email secondhand stores putting out old sofas, chairs, clothes on the public sidewalk, allowing that. So it wouldn't just be, my understanding with your email, it wouldn't be just cafes. That would open the door for anyone?
I think that's a good point, that there's certainly that argument to be made, and it's one of the risks I think that the council undertakes when they do this. And it may be a benefit to the city to do that, it may not be a benefit to the city to do that. But if you let one type of business do this and advertise their wares by having open tables and a restricted area, then why shouldn't other businesses be permitted to do that? There's some constitutional law out there which involves signage that there could be that next step taken. And so that's why I put it in there that there's a possible argument and another possible either expansion of this concept if you go that route, or if you want to limit it to just sidewalk cafes, you may have some pushback from other property owners who want to go further.
Who was next? Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I think you know, we have kind of been down this road with the bump out issue and so forth and decided not to do it for similar reasons to what you've already said. But really, the best solution is the solution that Sean Houck's landlord took. You have a bump in. You use some of your square footage and put a front door in. That solves the entire issue, because to me, the idea of putting liquor out on the sidewalk, that's just asking for trouble, especially when it's not a food service organization. So I don't know particularly what business we're talking about, but what Sean did, or what Sean's landlord did, was move that in about 10 feet, and then you got room for 4 or 5 tables in there. Now, he's not using it that way most of the time, but he has. And that's been an awesome way to do it. Now, granted, that costs the owner or renter, if you will, it's gonna cost him some money, but if you really wanna do that and serve outside, and that's the only ground you got, you have to build in.
Mike?
I like outside dining areas, and whenever I have a chance to eat outside, because you know we don't get to do that very often in Wyoming. But having said that, I absolutely oppose taking the public sidewalk and saying, okay, you can take that public sidewalk and use that for your private business. Because frankly, what would stop me from saying, I'm a member of the public, yeah, that's not my business right there that I want to be in front of, but why couldn't I come down and set up a business on the sidewalk there? If they can set up a business on the sidewalk, why can't I do that? And I think that would be a pretty tough one to defend. And so I just think it'd be just a horrible idea. I've seen it, you know, Billings has it, you know, they take it. I just go along and I look at it and say, what makes them so special that they get to appropriate part of the public right-of-way for their purposes? And so I'm opposed to that.
Kristen?
I understand how this question's gonna sound, but I just don't know. What are we doing about the businesses that are doing this currently? I mean, do we just do nothing? That's just my point, I guess. Like, we were waiting on this, maybe? Is that?
So that are doing this, are you talking about, so those businesses that already have established on their own property?
No, I mean like downtown, like say whether it's tables or whether it's putting out wares on tables for people to sift through or purchase or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I think there are certain nights where we'll have special events downtown where we do permit vendors, merchants, to go ahead and have, you know, buy with the
Crazy
day
days.
sales, and I think there was a couple of Thursday nights where they did that as well.
They swear all the time, but okay.
Right, what she's
That one is, but
pointing
the other
out
one's
is,
not.
I'm gonna throw it out there, like Jackie's Diner, she used to have tables sitting out there that she would serve people right on the sidewalk by that little piano. There's a clothing store that's just down from her that would, within a little area right by their door, but they would put out mannequins with clothes and stuff. And there's
Poverty.
Harvard. There's
and
also
crates.
what's on the corner of 12th and CY, Kim's Closet. They put stuff out in front of her store that's technically a sidewalk. So I hear what she's saying is, if we say no to this, which I say no, will that prevent them from doing that then?
Well, no, the law right now would say that, you know, unless you have some type of special event going on, that no things are supposed to be out there on the sidewalk to prohibit the public transfer, ingress, egress, movement on the sidewalks. So I think that's probably true. It's probably just been that, and I don't know. But I do remember some of the things that we've talked about when I think about it. But
And that wasn't on Crazy Days or whatever it is. That's
Sure.
every day thing. So
Sure.
during the summer.
sure.
So would that stop them, or would they get fined for that? How would that is what you're asking, right? How would
Sure.
so
It's
those
against the
who
law
are
now.
doing that?
And that's kind of my point of, because I guess my point is if all of a sudden tomorrow morning,
Sort of
I
like
need to show them,
parkways.
they'll be like, I've been
Well,
doing it.
yeah.
Like,
We're discussing enforcement when maybe we should discuss moving forward or backward on
Yep.
it. Or not backward, right?
Well-
Forward or not moving anywhere.
I think, yeah. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I personally, from a policy standpoint, would like to use this discussion and this outcome to be our springboard for consistent enforcement throughout the downtown. Whether it's happened in the past, whether it's going on now, whether it's not going on now, or whatever. If indeed council says yes, for example, to sidewalk cafes, my suggestion would be that you would also give us that direction, either tacitly or not, that says if you're gonna put a table out here, come get a sidewalk cafe permit. On the other hand, if council says we're not interested in sidewalk cafes, we're not gonna do that, I would hope that that direction would also be, for those that are doing it now or have been or whatever, plan to, we would go to them and say, we're not allowing that anymore. It's not gonna happen, because the council has said no to sidewalk cafes. Now, when it comes to events or activities or crazy days, you know, whatever that is, if council's willing to, you know, render a street closure and have that pedestrian, you know, sort of access, to me that's a little different. But for routine service out on the sidewalk, I'm hoping I can get direction one way or the other that we're going to use from now on.
I say we do not move forward on the sidewalk cafes. And what you talk about is already, I'm disappointed that you need our support to do that.
It would help.
Well, I guess I look to all of you. If you put pressure on the city government to not enforce any of our standing laws, that's a problem. It should just be an expectation that you do that. If anybody's doing that, shame on you.
I want to answer Mike's question. You asked, why should you get to? I think that was your question.
Yeah, why?
Here's the answer. Because you're paying a market rate lease for that space to the city.
So if I don't have a business downtown, but if I decide I want to pay a market rate space,
I think you
I
would
should
have
be
to,
able to
you
come
have
down
to
and-
tailor it to say it's, I mean,
that's,
these things exist in the real world. We all know that. And there are places, apparently Gillette's one of them, where they have found a way. And I mean, maybe I'm the contrary voice here. I would like us to find a way. And given all of those impediments that John just gave us, for all the obvious reasons, it does enhance your downtown when you have outdoor eating areas. That's why this came up in the first place. So maybe there's no way to do it, but I would like to think that there is. The constitutional provision that you can't give someone something unless it's for the necessary support of the poor, you handle that by making people pay for it. And pay what it would cost for them to lease that ground from anyone else, but you say it has to be in front of an existing business. And maybe there's, like I say, some roadblocks we can't get past.
the way, at least what I've observed up in Billings, the way that they do it is they restrict the size of the sidewalk. And instead of it being you walk down the sidewalk and it's a nice wide sidewalk, and then all of a sudden you come to the Montana Brewing Company and they have a little fence that goes out there and takes up about half, 3/4 of the sidewalk. And so the pedestrians have to walk around that and detour around that. That's the way that it would end up having to be. So that's the answer to that part of the question.
Is it 5 feet?
That particular sidewalk is a very wide sidewalk there, and so that might be the pedestrian way that's still left there.
So what's the problem?
Is that. But I just have a problem with saying that this private business can, in essence, appropriate, albeit they're paying for it, appropriate that public space that way. That's a different, that's something different than what I think's been allowed, and I don't think it. I think it creates an unlevel playing field. We heard all the people talk about brick and mortar versus food trucks. I can hear the people saying, well, geez, they're getting some square footage there at something other than a market rate. And
I mean, to me, the only way you could do this would be if you insisted on market rate. I'm not sure it was first. Go ahead, Chris.
You know, the outdoor cafes are neat, but I think the minute we start, we know we have to start navigating and manipulating around statutes and constitutional issues. We know we're going down the wrong path right away and setting ourselves up for a jam. So I don't think it's worth it.
Kristen?
No, I mean, I think that's exactly it. If we had 12-foot sidewalks, then this is a completely different discussion. But we don't. There is absolutely no sidewalk downtown that I know of that you could block off enough room for a table and chairs and for people and waitresses and waiters to move around and still have an ADA acceptable area of sidewalk that people could pass. Unless we were closing off the street for like particular events and things. But during normal operating, I don't think any sidewalk downtown is that wide or that.
I think there are some, but I could be wrong. But go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. I really concur with you guys. I mean, we're talking taking property from the public, and it's public use property. But I still go back and say, if we encourage people to do this, but when you rent the building or you buy the building, pay your architect to build it that way. Give you 8 or 10 feet in front to put 3 or 4 tables. And if we put that policy out there, that sets the tone for the whole downtown. We still have some really nice properties down there that could really do that. I think of the old Woolworth store. You know, that's open several times as a restaurant. But if they just take that corner and say, okay, well, let's see, that's not where the lawyer from Jackson has his office, but that same concept. You know, just indent your outdoor areas. You know, you can still put a glass garage door up. That makes it for use in the winter. But if we put that policy out there, we haven't hurt ourselves, and we don't run into the constitutional issues that we really have to deal with.
I still say we're reinventing the wheel because this is done. Not the way you're describing. It's done in the, I believe, the public space. Every place you go to an outdoor cafe, it's not an indent, it's outside.
When I look in Old
There's
Town
gotta
and
be a
Fort
way they
Collins,
do
that's
this,
the way
and-
they are. They're usually on their own property.
Well, okay. I think there's a mix.
Who wants to be like Fort Collins?
There's a good point.
Well, there's some things. Most things not. But Steve?
I just think that when you look at the downtown area, I agree that the sidewalks, I don't think are big enough to have ADA compliance and then also be able to put cafes out there without going out into the street or, I just don't. In some of those sidewalks down there more than others, there's some that may be big enough for it, but there's others that aren't. I like Bob's idea. That would be up to the owner to build in. As far as the enforcement goes, it's been there forever, and that needs to take place. And poverty resistance is a very good example of that, where I used to constantly have conversations with Mary Ann down there about people that would just bring their junk sofas and clothes and everything else and just throw them out on the side of the building. And unfortunately, she was responsible for, organizing to get that taken out of there, the junk taken where it should have been in the first place, to the dome. And that was a repetitive conversation that we constantly had. But the enforcement's been there. She knew she couldn't do it. It was a battle for her all the time, a battle for us to try and figure out how to not make that happen. So it's there. It's on the books. You don't need us to say that it needs to be done. If we move forward and don't do cafes downtown, then those people need to be made aware of what the law is, and it is what it is.
I think I lost this one. It's not what it looks like.
Before make sure what we're talking about here.
Well, the proposal was that we would pursue some way to allow restaurants or other businesses to use a part of our public right-of-way to conduct their business via some lease agreement, and I think that we got a bunch of thumbs down on that. Kristen?
Could we though, for now, say no, this doesn't appear reasonable due to the constraints that have been proposed, so on and so forth. But we could tuck this back on our list and do research for these other communities that are doing it and see, have they somehow done something to get around it? Or we just have smaller sidewalks in these communities? Like, what is it? Like, if Gillette's doing it, I mean, maybe Gillette has the same size sidewalks we are, and they're either just taking the risk, or there is, like, some way that they've, like, made this work. So, I think we could say no tonight and still do research as to how is Gillette doing it, how is Billings doing it.
Who's our representative on the DCBA? I guess you could bring that up with them, Bob, and see if they want to make a case for us on behalf of those members of their group that would like to do this, and see if they could persuade us to change our mind.
Well, they're pretty much on board with the special events thing that you talked about.
Okay.
And that's really what they don't have many people. There's 2 people that used to be on DCBA. Both restaurants are gone now.
So there aren't any restaurants or even a member that are active in the group, huh?
Yeah, but I will bring it up though.
Well, I mean, give people an opportunity, because maybe there is something we're missing. Steve?
Well, and I just want to reiterate what she's saying. I totally agree. I think it's a great concept. I think it'd be awesome to have downtown. But with what we're being told here tonight and with what we know of our downtown, it just doesn't seem feasible to us. So I agree, we should say no, but at the same time, we should do research. If there's a way of doing it, that we can actually bring it in and make it work, then let's look at it and potentially do that. But right now, I would just tell you, I don't see how it's gonna work at the moment, but we may be missing something. There's something out there that we're not informed about that could change the whole conversation. So
Practically, this can't happen unless you surrender some parking spaces. That's the reality we face. And I still think I'd like to think there's a way to do that, but, okay, let's just call it good for now, right now that it's a no, and, how are we gonna get this research done?
Mr. Mayor, I might be able to answer that. I happen to be the one that put that in place in Gillette. But the,
It's your
I mean,
fault.
I know, it's ironic.
Now you speak up.
The biggest difference and advantage that we had in Gillette was we redid the main street in Gillette from storefront to storefront and 6 feet down. And so we rebuilt the entire main street, north to south, east to west, with the idea that we would accommodate sidewalk cafes. And so we made fat
So let's do
sidewalks.
that.
Very fat sidewalks.
Yeah.
And it made the discussion much, much easier. Bazaars, everything else, much, much easier when you got a ton of sidewalk space.
But I bet you also sacrificed some parking spaces when you did that rebuild.
Well, what we sacrificed was we had a big turning lane in the middle of Main Street that never made much sense to me. And so we got rid of that. We didn't lose much street surface corridor, but we gained a ton of sidewalks on either side. And that saved our day, honestly. It was that easy.
Because, I mean, the other part of the argument is the parking study says we don't need more parking spaces. Kent?
We could go to those little piggy bank cars and shorten up the street completely instead of trucks and cars. We'll
Go
go
put an order that only smart cars are allowed
there.
downtown.
You see,
There you go.
there you go.
No,
Ford
he
and
said-
smart cars, right? Chris?
He said
That's right.
piggy bank.
And then we'll haul down the flag.
Okay, well,
Sorry.
is there anything else we could do to find out how other municipalities have done this? Or, because I have a problem when we leave something undone and we don't have a plan for finishing it. So unless we're finished with it now. Chris?
We only had one request, right?
Yeah.
So we're beating this horse to death based on one request 2 years ago. Please stab me in the eye with a pencil.
I'd like to think there'd be some others that would pursue it if we gave them the green light, but anyway. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if no one's actively, we can always readdress it if somebody comes up and is like, I really desperately want a sidewalk cafe, but.
There really isn't a restaurant association. Well, I guess there is the restaurant and lodging group.
That's true.
And they could make a case. So, I'll tell you what, can we do this? We don't have a group that represents us with the restaurant and lodging group, right?
I think Councilman Johnson sits on the lodging tax board, doesn't he?
travel into it.
Yeah. Yeah. the
Just
travel
to bring it
tour.
up and just say, if you guys wanna make a case, it's on you.
Yeah.
And it'd have to be a pretty strong case for us to even put it on the agenda again. Okay, alright. Leave it. Okay, let's move on to capital budget discussion.
All right, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, council people, this is our second discussion relating to the fiscal year 20 capital proposal, if you will. In the interim period between the first time we brought this to your consideration and now, we did receive a number of questions from a number of you, and we did our dead level best to cover all of them in the memo that you received electronically. That should look somewhat like this, to try to address those questions that we got in and all those kinds of things. Certainly, if there are other questions that maybe this didn't clear up, or questions beyond what we covered in this memo, or direction to scratch projects or add projects or whatever, the fact is we've got now until the time we actually pass the budget to make any of that happen. It would certainly be advantageous for us from a planning standpoint to get that direction tonight or soon hereafter to build your budget books around. But I recognize a lot of these discussions are complex and challenging, and the reality is we can talk about projects for next fiscal year as well, with regard to its implication of 1 cent or whatever. So we've got a lot of ways we can go with this. At the end of the day, we do need direction to move forward in some regard, so we can put your budget books together and get you something that, somewhat represents what it is you'd like to see happen.
So you guys got answers to your questions. How did they come across, Chris?
This one answered a lot of my questions. I would still like to know the number of skiers per open ski day on Hogan and what we're seeing in attendance at Spectra. I know those aren't in here, but
yeah,
because any money versus some will hinge on that in my book.
Can I respond? Mr. Mayor, Councilman, a couple of you had questions that were very, very similar, and my suggestion would be that we go ahead and remove that quad lift project from the itinerary, if you will. Maybe in the interim period between now and whenever this might come back up again for funding consideration, we can have a work session on the matter to really dig deep into the conversation about lift issues and maybe even broader Hogan issues. So I would not be uncomfortable with that proposal at all.
I'd appreciate that. I mean, I need an objective reason to expand the lifts. I don't buy the safety hazard for air conditioning, but I do buy, it makes it more appealing for summertime use. So that's, sometimes I lose credibility in people that write some of those things when I see that. But maybe also a drop off a pickup zone that's concreted so that a person wouldn't have to, not necessarily the whole lot, spend a lot of money up there. Whether it's paying out for us, we might have to build that in increments. And then similar things with the event center. And I see we've got a lighting project maybe on a future deal that we're gonna have to discuss at the event center as well. So I'm not opposed to them. Justify them, and then if they're nice to haves, I'm all about saying it's nice to have, and I can understand how to decide where it fits in.
Other comments on Carter's answers to the questions? Were you satisfied, Ken? Because you had some questions.
I did. I had a lot. I think probably the code enforcement vehicles. It talks about the two-wheel drive Ford Escapes. However, these vehicles were prone to getting stuck. They're still looking at truck purchases. What type of trucks? What the if it's the Ford F-150, 250, 350, the three asked about the Ford F-350s. It was never answered to me on that there. The base cost estimate of police interceptor compared to the Ford F-150. I appreciate that. That answered the price difference answered that question for me. Let's see. One of the questions I threw in there that didn't get answered was about the security, the community's security people getting vest Does that decrease our insurance, or help with insurance at all? I had several questions about that. That didn't get answered. So will that save us money by doing it or not? Yes, sir.
Are you talking about the body armor for code enforcement?
Yes.
Okay.
I was wondering if that will help with insurance. I can't remember exactly what all I put in the email.
I think to me the purpose behind that isn't to save insurance, to save lives, so.
I get that. Yeah.
There really is no insurance benefit.
Okay.
It's protection.
Those animal protection officers, code enforcement officers, and police officers, and also the fire department code inspectors deal with exactly the same section of people in the community, and oftentimes there is no recognition when you're standing right in front of them, the difference between a badge or even the color of a uniform. It's all, they all represented as the police.
Gotcha. Had a lot of questions regarding the Hogan, or I mean not Hogan, but what was it? The event center. So Chris brought that up.
Were you satisfied with the answer?
Well, didn't you say that we'll have to have a further discussion?
Pending, right, Carter?
The
Use info and that kind of historical attendance, that kind of stuff.
for event center or Hogan?
Both.
We can take on both of those at another time if council would prefer. Absolutely.
Because like one,
for more in-depth discussion, I guess is what you're saying.
Because one I disagreed with was the fence around the back end, the price and the amount, the fence that they're wanting. I disagreed with it. But I'd like to know, I guess, more information. The Station 6 concrete improvements, I agree with the fire hydrant. But I went up there and talked to the guys and I said, so where are you talking about the drainage system going across the sidewalk or parking lot? And the guys that were there didn't know exactly, so we looked at almost every drain and they showed me. So I'm not exactly sure where at. There's several spots that in the back of Station 6, kind of by the houses, the water runs right on the sidewalk. I mean, 2 of them runs right on the sidewalk. In front of the station, there is 2 drains that come parallel with one another, and I can see where that goes all the way down the concrete, all the way down to the street. So I wasn't sure, and this talked about redoing the sidewalk.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
Deputy Chief Griswold, can you tell us what's going on with this?
Sure, yeah, councilman
I'm sorry, I
members,
didn't see you back here.
council. No, that's okay, and you're right, I do actually have a photo. It's gonna be, I would describe it on the northeast corner of the station. You can see where the water drains across. So this is the patio area out here, and this would be the back corner. One question as I investigated it further is, could we just turn that to dump into those rocks?
There's several of them that I thought could.
And the way that station was designed is for those gutters to hit a gutter system in the concrete and then shed water away from sidewalks and walkways. So where, yes, you'll see water shedding across the parking lots, it's avoiding walkways in most areas except for this one. There may be an option to just turn this gutter to go into those rocks rather than across that sidewalk like it's designed right now, which would be $7,000 project. That project, we could look into avoiding that.
Right, and there's several of them on that. There's 2 of them back there that's like that. Now the one that my concern was that we looked at is this one here that runs on down, and then it comes clear down here, that they actually talked about when they're pulling out the fire truck, if that water freezes, it kicks out the butt end. That's where public people park, so when they're trying to, if they go up there, they're gonna hit all that there. And sorry, I don't have this to throw up, but the gutters comes down here and flows all through on down into here.
Catches another gutter, then goes to the street.
So at, so there's two gutters that all is supposed to follow along, but it does, it comes out. So I guess that's why I was asking is that there, but I think that's more of a concern for public than what you're talking about, and I believe that most of those can be twisted into the rocks.
That particular situation there you're talking about, you're right. This is technically all driveway, if you will. It avoids sidewalks, but it does drain on the shady side of the building. It doesn't cross any sidewalks, so if public is staying on the sidewalks, they should be able to avoid any drainage from those gutters there.
Because, I mean, there's more in detail there than, like I said,
it hits that gutter system right there, then crosses the driveway.
Right, so it creates more. So I guess, so my question was, where is it, what were you talking about? And you showed me, but I think we could save money by just twisting those, like you
And
said,
I don't
into
disagree
the
with
rocks.
you. I think that'd be something to look with buildings instructors, see if that's a good option.
This one I worry more about than I do what you were originally proposing. So that's why I had to ask that question. So I appreciate that being answered. And sorry, I didn't have this more. Sorry, I had a lot of questions. The turnout gear, that answered, sorry. And then I guess the one that didn't get answered is about the hazmat suits.
Good. Do you mind repeating that question for everybody?
Oh, let me get to that email if you don't mind. Give me half a second. Sorry, y'all. Let's see. Basically the question was, how often does those hazmats need to be replaced? Why do we need, and I'm not reading this, I'm looking for what I sent Ms. Fleur. Why did we need 8 of them, I guess, so many of them.
We can take a crack at it, if that's all right.
Yeah.
That's okay, Mr. Mayor?
Want to try it now?
Yeah, we can take it right now. Okay. You bet. You mind if I defer to the chief or chief?
Mayor, council, this kind of falls in my realm within the department. I manage a regional response team, hazardous materials response team. We respond to calls within Natrona, Converse, and Niobrara County. We're funded by Homeland Security funding. The $36,000 shown on your sheet for replacement of 8 suits is in the form of a grant that we've already received. As part of that team, we replace a certain amount of suits every few years so that our inventory stays current. Our suits don't have a shelf life per se, but they start developing problems the older they get. And they're such a critical piece of equipment. We use them in atmospheres that would kill us if they weren't intact and working. And so that's why we have a replacement problem. But it's funded through a grant from Wyoming Homeland Security. They get their funding from federal Homeland Security in support of our response.
Thank you.
Satisfactory?
Yeah.
Mike?
I had just a couple of things. I would like to see the chairlift business at Hogan continue going forward, because as far as concerns about what's the usage and any negative impact of the fact that we have limited lift capacity up there, a lot of those things can be answered as you move along with the process. But, you know, I can just tell you that what the outcome of that's gonna be is that you're gonna find that there are a lot of people that don't come up there because they have the perception that, in some instances has been promoted by the press, that chairlift is old and, quote, rickety, to quote the newspaper a few years ago, which is absolutely not true. But also that, you know, you have lift capacity issues, and so I think that if we want to really treat that as an asset, we need to be continuing to move forward and look forward about how to improve those things. The paving the parking lot up there for $315,000, that's not a real big priority in my mind. I hope that Tim's not
Can we take a crack at that, Mr. Mayor?
About
Please,
that,
go
but the
ahead.
other thing with reference to the code enforcement, I didn't say by Ford Escapes, I said by Subarus, and Subarus are four-wheel drive, and I don't think that they would get stuck like the Ford Escapes.
Just wait, here we go, ready? Take the flag.
Haul it down. Well, and if I may, I guess.
I think they're made in Tennessee.
All right. It was also discussed in the Hogan Park master plan, well, we need a completely new lift because the technology under the existing lift is so old, but that was a $5 million project, so I can't remember exactly what the new chairs were gonna cost, but obviously if we invest a lot of money in new chairs, that would probably defer even further ever getting to the point where that new lift would happen. So anyway, go ahead, Carter.
Mr. Mayor, there's a number of questions that I feel like we could address this evening and hopefully get your blessing to move forward on a number of projects. I would also contend there's probably you know, a couple projects that we should defer discussion for, maybe even remove from the capital plan for now, and carry those forward into the interim in preparation for the next budget year. I'm not opposed to that either. But there are a couple things that we do hope we can keep moving forward with. As far as the concrete on Station 6 is concerned, we'd like to keep moving forward on that. I don't know if your questions were satisfactorily answered or not, but I would not like to see that funding for that project removed from the budget. If indeed we need to talk about other design concerns, that's fine, no problem. We will bring those back, but I would ask that we keep that funding intact so we can keep that project on the front, you know, moving forward with it, is what I'm trying to say. As it relates to Hogan, if we could take a shot at Hogan here, a crack at Hogan. There's a couple of things that I would suggest we should do, and Councilman Walsh brought this up, Councilman Huber brought this up as well. Let's start with the parking lot. I appreciate what you said earlier about enforcing our current ordinances and so on. I think that's a real critical statement with regard to this project here, because in fact, as it relates to Hogan, we should all be receiving a citation for not having the appropriate parking constructed up at Hogan. And maybe even the event center. I'm not sure about that necessarily, but for sure with Hogan. The other thing that I would suggest that you think about as it relates to supporting that project, the parking lot project, is indeed one of council's discussions as it relates to the goals meeting that we had a number of weeks ago was with regard to trying to make Hogan a more relevant and used asset year-round. We hope to have a large increase in wedding activities and other summer uses for Hogan to supplement the business that we do up there, with the eventual goal, hopefully, knock on wood, of reducing that subsidy that we provide to that facility. We do believe that enhancements in the parking lot and enhancements from an air conditioning standpoint make sense with regard to that particular goal. For instance, when you have wedding parties, indeed you have a number of people, a gathering of people in a constricted space. A lot of those people are elderly when it comes to wedding parties. We do believe, and we stand by that safety comment, because indeed when you're talking about the elderly, you're talking about the middle of the summer, and you're talking about a confined space, so to speak, that doesn't have as a good ventilation system as it should. We think it does pose a safety concern. We think having AC makes it a more viable facility for year-round use. We also think that having a good parking for at least a portion of the parking lot, not the entire parking space that's up there, makes it a more viable option for year-round use, particularly as it relates to wedding parties and people in nice clothes trudging through the parking lot. It could be on a rainy day, it could be a sunny day, we're not sure, but we want to accommodate that type of crowd. So that's why we would suggest keeping those two projects in play. I realize it's a lot of money. I'm hoping we can use opportunity funding for some of that, and that would be my pitch for at least those two projects. Do I need to wait for thumbs or no thumbs or?
Well, maybe we should stop. Is that a persuasive argument for to everyone that we should?
If I could ask a question about the, because it's a little bit unclear to me here. You're talking about $315,000 to pave the parking lot there at Hogan. It's unclear to me if that's to, in some manner, resurface the entire parking lot, just the area that's pretty close around the entrance to the lodge, because I agree, there's some things that need to be done. There are some drainage issues and some things like that. And I understand that, you know, no matter how carefully you engineer and study and plan and try to contour new construction, that sometimes when when it actually hits the ground, it's, you know, the drainage isn't what you thought it was going to be. And I think that's kind of what's happened with that right around the front door there. And so I absolutely agree there's something that needs to be done with that. So I don't know how much, what is this $315,000 just to deal with that, or is it what?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, we're hoping that the 315 does deal with that, but that it also provides us paved space to comply with our code requirements that ordinance currently suggests. It would also include luminaires and some brief landscaping as well, Andrew, is that correct? Go ahead, please.
Your Honor, Council, that whole parking lot was designed in phase, and that phase one is to create an entryway around the entrance into Hogan, and to create, I think, I want to say 50 additional parking spots to comply with our municipal code. Very limited landscaping. It does take care of the drainage concerns, though. But I'm not aware. I don't think we threw any money in there for landscaping.
But this is okay. Is this just for paving and drainage issues right adjacent to the entrance to the lodge?
Not just right adjacent, and it also creates, I want to say, 50 additional parking spaces. So it creates the entryway around into the entrance to Hogan, and also 50 additional parking spaces, so that we're in compliance with our municipal code. It does not pave that whole 5 acres or whatever we have right now of road-to-mill tailings that go all the way out to the entrance road.
Well, and if I may, Carter's right that us having a dirt parking lot, it's a do as I say, not as I do. And because we should not have a parking lot that doesn't meet our own codes. Chris?
Well, when we discussed this a couple of years ago about the parking lot we had over here, it didn't seem to be a problem. Or the one that we're leasing. It was when the same conversation came up with Gaslight, and they had a non-paved parking lot. We pointed out the same thing. So why do we have to throw out the smokescreen instead of saying, if we want a summertime use, it wouldn't be beneficial having it where a person can walk and not go through the mud? When you throw this garbage at me about I'm violating city ordinance, I know I have been for the last 2 years, and everybody here is complicit in it. So let's avoid all that and just call it what it is. And then say, in good conscience, after the $4 or $5 million that we just put up there, we want several more million while we watch possibly existing structures fall into disrepair. And then do that in good conscience. I'm not opposed to the air conditioning, and I'm not opposed to having methods people can get out at those wedding parties. Lights me on fire when I'm treated like a fool, and I'm breaking the law now, and I wasn't 2 years ago.
My concerns about the parking lot have been answered, and I'm okay with that now.
Okay. Did you want to say something?
Do you mind if I?
Go ahead.
There is no way in this world I would try to treat any of you like fools. Honestly, that is not my interest, not my intent. But I do believe we are not in accordance with our own ordinance. I do believe that.
I agree, for a couple of years in places.
Let me finish if you don't mind. I would also say that Goodstein needs to be dealt with if that's the one you're referring to.
It is.
And you will see a proposal coming from me to deal with that too. We currently do not own that parking lot. That's a state-run parking lot. And until we're in a long-term lease to deal with that, I'm not going to recommend that we fix it. And so that's why I haven't come forward with Goodstein. But you are going to see a proposal from me, particularly in concert with a long-term lease with the state, which I don't have now, that will require us probably to refurbish both of those lots. And so I haven't ignored that. I don't have the ability to deal with it right now. And that's the distinction I want to make clear. I stand by my comment. We do think it's twofold, the needs for that parking lot. One, dealing with long-term, year-round use to accommodate wedding parties, absolutely. But also to deal with the minimally required code issues that Andrew identified and discussed that we think the 315 will deal with. So I deeply apologize if I offended you, Councilman Walsh. I didn't mean to. I stand by my answer. I think it's the honest truth. I've not been duplicitous with this council, and I never plan to be. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, where do we sit with Hogan? Were you going to say something else, Mike, or were you done?
No.
So we need. You're right. We should give you a thumbs up as we go through each one of these. So, air conditioning at Hogan.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess the parking lot as designed, the entryway in 50 spaces.
Can I ask a question on that? How do we arrive at 50 spaces? I mean, is it by the volume of people that are there? Is how we reach that amount? Or?
That's basically the answer. Do you want to address that a little bit further?
Council. Yeah, great question. We looked at the, I forget what we base it on. There is no manual for ski facilities that we could find, so we had to make a best guess estimate based off the daily average use. So
obviously there'll be days where people are going to park in the dirt.
Obviously there'll be some days where people will not be able to park in a designated parking spot and they'll have to park out in the road. But
Till phase 2.
All right, so what do we want to do about the chairlift? Do you need more information? No?
I need more information.
Yeah,
that's
I don't
enough.
feel
Yeah,
comfortable with
yeah,
that more
no problem.
information.
We've
No
lived
problem.
with it for this long.
No problem.
Except for, there's things in here for internal mechanism repair on that.
Correct.
That-
For the current system.
I'm talking about the 4 chairs,
Yep.
I'm not talking about the operational.
Right. Everybody's okay with fixing it, obviously. That's,
And the concrete? Oh, I'm sorry.
Station
What are we voting on
6.
now?
oh, and the concrete for Station 6. Did you go give a satisfactory answer on that?
I think the chief's moving the gutter.
Just go
Well,
Is that the same?
I will look to do that. They're gonna do what they need to do. And
Let's do
it
that.
may include put the concrete in if that's the only solution that's gonna work. Okay. All right, what else did we get an answer to that you needed
Well,
clarification on?
The other question that I've heard, and there are probably others, is with regard to the Ford trucks, the 150s versus the 350s. I think it was still a question for Councilman Bates. We can certainly address that as well, because I would like to stick with our recommendation and move forward.
Because you had, in Park Fleet trucks, you talked about the need to be able to haul this water tank.
7,000-pound trailers.
That's a lot.
And then you also needed something big enough
For
to
the
haul the
bigger mowers.
lawnmowers.
The bigger mowers, yep. That's exactly right. We can provide more information if that would be council's interest.
Let's see.
I don't
Did you
need,
s-
I don't need any more. No.
4 or 5.
We're good.
I think we got enough thumbs, Ken. So we're gonna have to move on. All right,
Okay.
so, were there any other unanswered questions here?
Mr. Mayor, with regard to the event center, there are a number of projects there. Here's what I would propose with the event center, because there's several. We can put all of those projects on hold for now. I would ask that we retain the funding for those projects in the capital plan so that we can come back and share with you in a lot more detail what it is that we'd like to do and what the overall view is and everything else. With the exception of one thing, some of you have already noticed that on the grid document, we are asking for some conversation relating to the lighting scenario. We can tackle that tonight. I think we're comfortable with that information enough to share with you what we are generally thinking, because that actually is a sooner than later kind of project. Or we can wait till a work session that we schedule tonight to deal with that topic. But for the bulk of the ones you see in the capital plan, we are more than happy to come back at a later date and talk in more detail.
You're asking for a green light on the lighting project. Comments, questions about the lighting project?
I don't know what we're talking about. That's the one you've got on the upcoming, right?
Correct.
Oh,
that's right.
Okay,
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I don't know what it is.
Is there something we need to do this evening?
We can tackle that this evening if you'd like, or we can set it for a work session date, whatever you'd prefer. It's definitely a capital item, but it's the one that we can tackle later if we need to.
Something you'd like to get resolved soon.
Correct.
I think we better defer it if there's concern, because we were about an hour and a half.
I just didn't know where it was at.
That's okay.
All right,
We'll schedule
is that okay with everyone? We'll talk about that one later. All right. Anything else on the budget?
May I jump in? I mean, this is obviously a thing. Is there something time critical on this?
Tim, do you mind discussing the time-sensitive nature of that?
I don't see any problem with deferring it.
Okay.
Money's already been budgeted. I'm just looking to combine some other monies to get the project kicked off and underway. We just would realize savings quicker due to the nature of the LED versus what we currently have.
Just as far as ongoing costs.
Correct, but as far as the event schedule we got coming up, is it mission critical? Absolutely.
The sooner we do it, the sooner our bills go down.
Basically.
Okay. So let's just defer that. Okay. Anything else on capital budget discussion?
If I could just get a few questions.
Okay. Nope. This is what
You have the email, so if you want to finish answering some of the questions I have thrown in here, I can wait for that.
That weren't included in the memo, or that were
Correct.
included in the memo?
Well, somewhat. So one that was you put in there was the Zolar Auto Poles, page 13, project 2020 Fire 04, 110,000. Is this for every fire station, every fire rescue truck? Does it transport with the patient to the hospital in use in the ambulance? More explanation. So I guess that's my question is that a one for every fire truck? Can it be transferred over to the ambulance, or do they need to continue to carry it? How does that work with the?
We can absolutely do that question right now. There's some information in your memo here, but could I defer to the chief for that, please? What you?
Sure. Because that didn't get answered in the memo.
The collective chief.
Good question, Mayor, member of council. That would be for 6 auto pulses, one for each of our 5 engines, as well as our rescue truck. And like your memo says, that does automatic compressions on a patient in cardiac arrest. So we would transfer with the patient, so we don't have to stop those compressions. And then once the patient's removed, that machine's removed from in the ER, we take our equipment back with us, put it back on the fire truck.
So you would have to go with the ambulance to the hospital to retrieve that, or would like somebody else retrieve it while the fire truck goes in something else that's possible?
Fair question. Typically with those patients in cardiac arrest, those are personnel heavy incidents, and we're transporting with those patients anyways, taking that engine wind, providing patient care. In the event the ambulance had ride-alongs, paramedic students where they didn't need the personnel, we could, the ambulance could shuffle that unit back out to our station, our battalion chief could shuffle it back, whatever. Our members are always trying to be cognizant of resource management. But the reality is full arrests, cardiac arrests are personnel heavy, and we're going in with those patients regularly.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just, the current pool liner project, didn't we, and I didn't see that in there, didn't we ask that we were gonna change that into a splash pad? Wasn't that on a consent item, that got approved as a splash pad?
You're talking about Marion Kreiner?
Yeah.
Yeah, Marion Kreiner. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the pool is very much still in operation. The splash pad did get approved, but it would be a companion facility to the pool. And so we believe that for the longevity of that pool, it's absolutely necessary to do the liner. One of the experiments that we conducted just as a matter of interest was with regard to whether or not we should charge fees at Marion Kreiner. And this summer, I believe was the first summer, that we waived those fees for that pool. You'll be happy to know that indeed attendance increased dramatically. And so if that becomes a permanent feature of our aquatics program, then that pool needs to continue to be viable, and we think that liner is positively critical.
Okay. Replacement of the John Deere tractor, this is page 59 for those who want to follow along, for $70,000. It's recommended, but I put in there current problem with the John Deere, how many repairs have it needed. I understand that they want to replace it, but is the current one no longer reliable? Tractors last a really long time. Most tractors I know last forever, so I'm not understanding why we need it. Do we absolutely need to replace that for $70,000?
Mr. Mayor, can I defer to Mr. Cortez for that response? It's a park piece of equipment, right?
Sure. Yeah, I believe so. Mr. Mayor, members of council, that we get those recommendations from the fleet, their oversight. Basically, it's based on a lot of what councilmen just require, like age of the unit, reliability, so I would include downtime, and then also how many repairs. So they go through with each piece of equipment that's assigned a number, and they track every time it goes into the shop and it gets some kind of repair, including the labor and the parts that go into that. So basically, we look at it as a recommendation from them based on all those factors to say, hey, we're spending a lot of money on this thing in the shop all the time. It is time to replace it. And so that's where we get the recommendation from, is from that fleet, based on all those factors.
Okay. I'm just kind of surprised.
And just so you know, Mr. Mayor and Council, we have a vast fleet of those types of pieces of equipment. So we have them kind of scheduled in the background for years on out, and we really do try not to replace them until we get to that kind of critical juncture where it's like, okay, we better tackle this one now. So we do triage those with the fleet recommendation.
And there's an actual rubric you follow, or schedule you follow, where you say, we know from history that this is when we reach that point where it's costing us more, and you do that in hours of service or miles.
All of those factors,
that's all
and they kind of grade them out. I think it's on a 3-part schedule, still like graded 1, 2, 3, and we do follow that. But we still also put in Planet, meaning our capital guide, to help give us some guidance there as well, based on what you just said, Mr. Mayor, like time and service.
Next one, page 66, replacement of ice arena tables and chairs, project cost $14,000. What's wrong with the current ones? I didn't hear anything back, particularly the tables in the lobby. I've been in the ice arena. I guess I don't see the issues with those tables. Chairs I do for the box, but I didn't see with the tables. So just kind of curious about that.
No problem. No problem. Can I ask Tim?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, same type of deal. Those are probably more on kind of the time issue, which they've been they're kind of the original equipment that came with it. And so as the lamination kind of peels away from the tables or around the edges or something like that. Some of them we just get rid of altogether, and we just don't have as many tables and chairs available. But we do get to a juncture where it just makes sense that we need to spruce that up, if you will. They just get hard use with people with their hockey equipment, stuff banging into stuff. It does probably get you a little more wear and tear than what we'd see in normal space within our facilities.
How old are they?
Mr. Mayor, I'd be speaking off the cuff. I just know that they said that they're aged quite a ways, and then I think we had this in front of council last year, and we decided to forego it just because of the money issues.
Last one that I'll throw out that I didn't see was the mobile traffic messenger / radar unit. This is page 83. If the point of these trailers is to alert drivers to their speed, why do we need the data collection and message boards? What would the data be used for? What kind of message do they anticipate putting on the message board if they received one of these? The cost is $31,135.
Mind if I ask the chief to address this? Chief McPeters' time. Please.
Thank you for the opportunity to explain those. Mayor and council, these message boards are force multipliers. The cost of having a police officer is fairly expensive. We're trying to use those to the best of our ability. We've identified areas within the community through feedback from our citizens. It's the number one complaint we get is on this particular street. They have speeders going by. They ask for the officers to be there. We can go there, but we're only there for a short amount of time. We pull over the 1 or 2 cars, and then we're called away. These message boards have the ability to accomplish several missions for us. We can educate the public on what we're trying to accomplish. That's the message. At the same time, it's gathering the data and recognizes, hey, there's somebody speeding. It has the capacity to change the message to idiot, slow down for that particular vehicle. So we're accomplishing a lot. The research behind them proves statistically they are extremely effective at changing behavior, at slowing people down and helping us reach our public safety goals. If you look at it from the point of view of I don't have to have 2 or 3 officers patrolling that street, and these are extremely cost effective. Did I answer your question?
Mr. Mayor, could I ask the chief a quick question? That approximately $30,000, that's for the little trailer around kind that you can park here today and there tomorrow and
yes,
that stuff. How much are the ones that are like on 12th Street that are on a pole and that, do you know offhand?
So I want to say that we researched that out recently. Andrew can answer that.
Your Honor, Council, we're getting ready to install those on 2nd Street where we just lowered the speed limit. Those are, you don't go buy those at Walmart, so they're on order right now, and I think they're in the neighborhood of $5,000 each.
Okay, so they're a fraction of what the cost
fraction
of the
cost.
trailer.
Again, you're grabbing data off of those systems and seeing what if the speeds are reflecting lower or not, trending lower.
Because I find those to be really helpful, and the motorists, people that I talk to.
And it will flash if you're going above 20 miles an hour. It will flash and let you know you're going above the speed limit.
Oh yeah, that one on Poplar sure lets me know. So I'm kind of wondering, like, your thoughts. It'd be almost cheaper to go that route on different sets than that.
Except for it wouldn't be mobile.
Exactly. I think that the purpose of this unit would be, like, say there are multiple complaints in the neighborhood. You know, we've got these 3 teenagers that are just going 90 miles an hour every day down. That would allow them to move it depending on the situation of, like, what's happening around town, where the other ones are stationary.
Yeah, that was not a teenager, that was an older guy on so. Sorry, I'm just kidding. Okay, that answers, thank you. I'm good.
So you got anything else? Okay. Well, I guess this goes back to the way we started this meeting with my apologies about inserting the Wham resolutions, because that took a fair amount of our time. Carter just informed me that the remainder of the items on our agenda could all be deferred. And so I think unless people want to go on and talk about the dog parks, or want to go on and talk about park fees, we could simply move these items to 2 weeks from today, and that would probably finish our item 11 as well. I think that would add up. I think that would add up to a full. Now the flip side of this is, we're not going to have a lot of work session time to do non-budgetary things now until June. And so if there's anything else that people are really itching for us to get to, understand that. So I would like to get to Code of Ethics, but I understand that's not going to happen until we get our budget done. So comments, questions on basically going around the table and calling it good tonight, or does anyone feel like we really should plow ahead? Ken?
I just want to say that I brought up the dog park, the grassy areas, but I also know that we threw it on the agenda because we are talking about the budget. So I think that is one that I don't want to say we need to hash out tonight, but it needs to be on the top of the list.
2 weeks from today.
Yes.
Comments?
I agree.
Okay.
Chris?
I just want to make sure we have set on that work session everything that the city staff needs to address. We added the lights for the event center, and
we're talking about the 23rd, correct?
Yep. Right. Okay. So we've got a few things on there already.
Plus what we got from this one.
Yeah. I mean, the historic preservation and building codes could be an extensive discussion, because we're talking about a fairly significant change that would allow people to move forward with some projects and be given some latitude that our codes don't currently provide.
Mr. Mayor, if you're looking for a suggestion, the tow fees and the disabilities discussion, council discussion, could certainly be deferred to make room for these topics here tonight. And it wouldn't put us off or delay us unnecessarily.
Yeah, because it is pretty close to a full agenda right now, yeah. Well, how about if we do this? I'm scheduled to meet with the Disability Council for their initial meeting next week, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
And why don't Carter and I discuss how much time we think we will need based on how that goes. We may not be in a position where we'll need a lot of time that night, in which case we could start our discussion of it and not take it off the agenda. So if you guys can give us the latitude, we'll just decide that ad hoc. Okay. And so then, I guess, how about if we do this? Carter's going to have a staff meeting between now and our next work session, or a couple of them. How about if we just give them the latitude to put whatever they need to on the 23rd to wrap up the capital construction project discussion? Okay?
Thank you. That'd be great.
And then we will
Mr. Mayor,
wrap it
can I
up
ask
then.
one question before we leave capital completely? We sent a memo to the council pertaining to residual dollars that the Platte River Parkway Trust has from their 1 cent 15 allocation. And I think we also sent a spreadsheet that would list the projects they would recommend for that, which, yep, looks just like that. We can either bring that conversation to the 23rd or get your green light tonight in that this is a no new dollar request, if you will. But either way, we can certainly provide more information and bring the trust in on the 23rd as well, if that would suit council.
I would rather
Comments?
have it on the 23rd.
You want to discuss it?
No problem. Bring it in.
For those of you who weren't present when we did the 1 cent 15 allocations, I would just like to point out that Platte River Trust got less than 1/3 of what they requested in that discussion. And through good grant management, managed to get a lot done with 1/3 of what we allocated. So, but let's put that on the agenda for the 23rd then.
Will do.
Okay, I guess our agenda's set, so let's go around, see what else. Steve, do you have anything to tell us about tonight?
I have nothing.
Mike?
The only thing is about the 2nd Street speed limit. The interesting thing, everybody that I've heard from on that complains about that it's 20 miles an hour going westbound. They don't seem to be, they seem to be oblivious that it's also 20 miles an hour going eastbound. So, but I think we are going to have to wait and see how that works. And I was looking at that today, and I don't know, Chief and Andrew, if you could go along and put a 20-mile-an-hour sign on the light poles on every block. And I'm being serious about that.
I've noticed them slow down.
We certainly can, but I don't know if that will increase enforcement at all.
Well, I don't know either.
I did the math on that, by the way. Guess how much longer it takes?
30 seconds.
30 seconds, maybe.
Almost exactly 30 seconds. Anything else, Mike?
No.
Greg?
Nothing.
Bob?
Yeah, a couple items. We had the OYD meeting this week, and we have the nominations for the OYD awards, and they're in the vault on Funkin' Wagnall's porch. And so can't tell you anything about that, but they're there. Also this morning, I did go, and I'm not really a rep on the DCBA. I just joined DCBA because I live downtown. I don't have a business, but anyway, I went to their meeting this morning, and a couple things came up. There are some real concerns about the rerouting of the parade that's come up. They just have some concerns, and I think we might hear from them about that eventually. The other thing that came up just this morning was the Goodstein lot. What are you gonna do about the Goodstein lot? And I gave them the speech that we don't own that sucker yet, and we don't have a long-term lease, but it will meet city parking standards if and when that occurs. So anyway, they were happy with that, but they thought, well, you guys, we've been using this a long time, but they didn't realize that we don't own it.
Most people don't.
I think that's it, thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, maybe you could just send this out if it needs to go to everybody. I had a question from the people that lease Field of Dreams and the extent, you probably know the conversation, the extent of work and ground rehabilitation, that kind of stuff they have to do. My first question was, what was the lease before we had any further? So, while we go about our routine day to day and wonder about our phones and our materials, 3 men were killed in Afghanistan this week, so remember we're still at war, and whatever bothered you today really wasn't that big a deal.
I don't have to follow him. One just quick suggestion, and it kind of came up in just a quick chat with Cassie. I was going to request if Commissioner Pitlick or whomever, when we start the budget discussions, could we maybe start with just, I'm not asking for something super high-tech and complicated, but just like an explanation of like how fund accounting works, as far as like how you can't just transfer from fund to fund willy-nilly and things of that nature. I just think that might help put things into perspective a tiny bit when we're talking about budget and like looking at funds balances and things of that nature. And then obviously we had requested to add Cassie just to the little grid for at some point to have them come and present to us in or around budget discussions. And that's it.
The only thing that I have other than everything else I brought up, sorry, is from a gentleman named Mr. Rod. He was talking about, some of you may have got it, about the Morad Park and around that area, how much garbage there is, how many people have, the amount of people that are dumping just their own personal garbage there. I did respond to him to get in contact with our parks services and talk to them regarding some of it. I did take a walk down there Saturday, as I told the gentleman, and there's a lot of garbage that people just are leaving or throwing or stuff. So he had some ideas. Some are good, some are well over what I think we could do, but if you get a chance, get down there, take a walk with your dog, without a dog. There's a lot of trash down there, and it's a park that we have, I think we need to look at, trying to take better care of it. There's a lot of good. He pointed out, I checked it out, it was. So other than that, went to the historical yesterday, historical board, and they're gathering, what was it, the
strategic plan for reviewing.
Which there's a lot of info, but it was really good to get to read through. So other than that, that's it.
And, we do have the Platte River cleanup is it next month, Jolene? Didn't we do it? I'm sorry?
Your Honor, the Platte River Trails Trust hosts a spring cleanup of the trail, and I believe it's on the 18th, and that's a Saturday of next month, 18th of May.
Perhaps our gentleman could lead a team to focus on that area, and we could get some other people to help out.
Your Honor, we'll do a write-up for you. There's been extensive research done. This is not a new problem in Morad Park, and we can address a lot of Mr. Rod's points. There's been extensive research as to where a lot of the trash is coming from, and so we'll follow up with that too, so you have.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
As pointing out the 20-mile-an-hour zone, somebody threw on Facebook that they think we're doing it just to catch Pokemon, and I caught 5. So if you go over 30, you can't catch them.
We've been they figured us out.
Distracted drive.
Not much on my end.
They discovered.
I did a proclamation on the Sexual Assault Awareness Month this morning. Very well attended. A lot of people concerned about that problem. Chief did an excellent job of explaining the problem, and our district attorney did as well. Tomorrow's the meth conference, and I'm giving the welcoming address and another serious problem that we all face. Also went to the Suicide Prevention Task Force meeting today, and that's a very active group doing their best. That walk will actually start from David Street Station this September, but they're doing a lot of outreach to the schools and having to deal with a lot of logistical challenges and sometimes some bureaucratic challenges as far as getting in to do some really important work with these kids. So that's it for me. I think we can call it good.
The post-legislative lunch, that's tomorrow, yeah?
Tomorrow.
Okay.
Yep.
At 11:30, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Do we need to adjourn?
Never done it, it's about review.
Yeah.
Do we need to